To order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the committee at any time. The committee is meeting today to hear testimony from the Secretary of the Department of the Interior, the Honorable Deb Haaland, on the Department of Interior's fiscal year 2025 budget request. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. Good morning and welcome, Secretary Haaland. We appreciate having you back in the committee, and I'm looking forward to hearing your testimony and the questions from our members today. While some things have changed since you last appeared before us, much has remained the same. I know our members and I have many questions for you on DOI's policy making over the past 12 months and the way your agency continues to ignore local voices in pursuit of vague, undefined goals dictated by a radical agenda. The consequences of DOI's actions are deeply felt in areas that have relied on multiple use of public lands for generations. These communities have been abruptly destabilized by decisions from DC bureaucrats who think they know what's best. Despite the administration's inclusive claims, their actions are painting a different picture, one that is causing real harm to our fellow Americans. DOI's games are putting America in jeopardy. With so many questionable actions from DOI, it is impossible to name them all, so instead I'll take them one jeopardy category at a time. The first is faux conservation, a category of cleverly named actions that in reality restrict land access to further an extreme environmental agenda. Leading off, the Bureau of Land Management's final rule, which when first proposed drew the ire of Western governors, members of Congress, and thousands of Americans. It's a danger to the land America relies on to feed and fuel our economy and a blatant disregard for input. The answer to that clue is, what is BLM's public lands rule? Not to be outdone, the next category is rogue rules, and here's your clue. This rulemaking will impose new fees and regulatory burdens on Americans' energy producers, have devastating effects on small businesses, and increase energy costs for consumers. The answer is, what is BLM's onshore leasing rule? Or how about our next category, where's my energy? I'll give you several clues, starting with the latest devastating sanctions on Alaska. The decision to limit energy development in the NPRA ignored the blatant concerns of indigenous communities, residents of Alaska, and Alaska's entire congressional delegation. The Biden administration also effectively shuttered mineral development in Alaska by blocking the access road to the Ambler mining district. Lest President Biden forgets, these are the same minerals needed for his own renewable energy goals, not to mention the items we depend on for our daily use. When it comes to these actions and this clue, the answer is clear, and that is, what are Biden's attacks on Alaska's right to produce energy and minerals? I've been a little tongue-in-cheek with my examples, but the jeopardy posed by the actions of the Department of Interior under the Biden administration is all too real. Each decision I outline came out of just the past 2 weeks. Just the past 2 weeks, those three decisions and three rules which seem more like lawmaking that Congress should be doing instead of rulemaking by the administration. There's not enough time for me to outline the attack after attack from this administration since day one. At the same time, the Biden border crisis has spread to every community across America. I've spent time in New York City, of all places, seeing how National Park Service lands are now home to camps for migrants. This rules for thee and not for me situation shows DOI is choosing to prioritize the needs of migrants above the safety and well-being of American communities and our treasured public lands. This administration treats policymaking as a game, using American communities as political pawns. Unfortunately, decisions have real consequences. We're talking about people's livelihoods, real money, not game show winnings. In contrast, Republicans have advanced policies that promote a healthy environment and a healthy economy. These are not mutually exclusive goals. In fact, they go hand in hand. Our solutions provide access to American resources, advance conservation, environmentally friendly ideals and put local leaders in the driver's seat instead of DC bureaucrats. Secretary Haaland, I urge you to give all communities a seat at the table, not just the ones that fit your narrative. End this pattern of disrespect and disregard and work with us to enact meaningful change that works for everyone. I yield back my time and now recognize the ranking minority leader, Ms. Kamlager-Dove, for any statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and a warm welcome to you, Secretary Haaland. I know that you served on this auspicious committee before you became secretary. I also know that Ranking Member Grijalva is disappointed that he can't be here to welcome you himself, but I think I speak on behalf of all of my colleagues in saying that we are glad he is taking time to fully recover. Madam Secretary, you are here today as we've had an unusually warm week in DC, and this is coming from someone from Los Angeles. I can't help but think of it as a subtle forewarning for the summer that lies ahead. Last year, we had the hottest summer on record, and many experts think there's a good chance we'll break that record again this time. But even if we only come close, it doesn't change the fact that our oceans, the planet's proverbial canary in the coal mine, are hotter than they have ever been in recorded history, and not by a small margin. The climate crisis is clearly here, and it is not shy. It is making its presence known in nearly every aspect of our lives. In fact, I think the only place where you can potentially forget that we're in the midst of the most existential crisis of our time may be in this very hearing room, where my Republican colleagues have yet to bring up a single bill that meaningfully addresses the climate crisis, not a single one. But gratefully, House Republicans are not the sole proprietors of our U.S. governing body. We are deeply fortunate to have the leadership of President Biden and Secretary Haaland, which is, shall we say, a bit more rooted in the reality that we're facing. When President Biden took office, he made a pledge to close the book on the climate denialism of the previous administration and restore the United States' climate leadership both here and abroad. And he, with your help, of course, Madam Secretary, has done just that. In fact, the Biden administration has accomplished more on climate than any other administration in history. Capitalizing on the historic investments in climate and clean energy that Democrats passed through the Inflation Reduction Act, the Biden administration is deploying clean energy across the country, which has garnered billions in private sector investment and created over 270,000 good-paying jobs with ribbon-cutting ceremonies across the country that Republicans attend as well as Democrats. At the Interior Department specifically, Secretary Haaland has overseen the recent release of several new rules that represent the bold action we need to transform the management of our public lands for a cleaner energy future. The Bureau of Land Management's new public lands rule, for example, finally puts conservation on equal footing with other uses of our public lands, like oil and gas drilling, grazing, and timber. Other newly finalized rules put long overdue fiscal reforms in place to make sure American taxpayers are finally getting a fairer return when big oil drills on our public lands and waters. Another rule builds on the success of the Biden administration, which has already surpassed its goal of permitting 25 gigawatts of renewable energy by boosting more solar and wind energy development on our public lands. Together, these new rules are transforming our energy economy status quo from one that has enabled the fossil fuel industry's desecration of our public lands, nearby communities, and global climate to one that is safer, cleaner, more sustainable, and more just. This is the kind of leadership the vast majority of Americans who want to see us do more on climate are asking for. But of course, it's decidedly not the kind of leadership that polluters want. We've seen them here week after week at the invitation of my Republican colleagues, pining and longing for the days of the previous administration, which rolled back more than 100 environmental rules so they could turn a bigger, quicker, and dirtier profit, all at the expense of the American people. So I want to thank you again, Secretary Haaland, because while it's clear that my colleagues across the aisle are all too willing to do the bidding of their favorite polluter pals, you have shown in no uncertain terms that our public lands and waters are no longer a breeding ground for corporate polluter greed. If industry wants to do business here, they will do it safely, they will do it responsibly, they will listen to nearby communities and tribes, and they will clean up their mess. This is the kind of leadership that will build a cleaner, safer, more affordable energy future with good paying jobs that will protect our beautiful public lands and special places for generations to come, and that will listen to the millions of Americans who've been overburdened by pollution for far too long. This is what puts American people first, your leadership. So thank you again for being here, Madam Secretary, and we look forward to your continued leadership. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady yields back. Now we'll introduce our witness. Our witness today is the Honorable Deb Haaland, and she is the Secretary of the Department of Interior, confirmed by the Senate on March 15th, 2021. She is accompanied by Acting Deputy Secretary Laura Daniel Davis and Director of the Office of Budget Defense, Denise Flanagan. Let me remind the witness that under committee rules, you must limit your oral statement to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the talk button on the microphone. Having been a veteran of the committee, you get the drill. As you know, we use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute left, the light will turn yellow. And at the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I will ask you to please complete your statement. I will also allow, after the testimony, then we'll have member questioning. And I now recognize Secretary Haaland for 5 minutes.
Chairman Westerman, Vice Chair Kamlayer-Dove, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Interior's fiscal year 2025 budget request. I appreciate all of the support this committee and your staff have consistently shown the Department of the Interior. I have especially enjoyed visiting so many of your home districts. Every trip informs my understanding of the issues important to the American people, the impact of the work that we do, and how our budget can support those interests. Our 2025 budget totals $18 billion in current authority. First, I want to highlight several important proposals: permanent pay legislation and reforms for our wildfire workforce, mandatory funding for future Indian water rights settlements, and reclassifying contract support costs and leasing payments to tribes from discretionary to mandatory funding starting in 2026. This administration has made a steadfast commitment to strengthen government-to-government relationships with tribal nations. We are doing so thanks to significant investments from Congress, which are helping address the deficiencies that decades of underfunding have created. I'm grateful to the members of this committee for working on a bipartisan basis to champion tribal priorities. With a total request of $4.6 billion for Indian Affairs programs, this budget will address complex and difficult challenges such as the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples crisis, the legacy and continuing impacts of federal Indian boarding school policies, and Native language revitalization. Public safety continues to be a top priority for tribal leaders across the country. The budget includes $651 million to support critical public safety needs across all of Indian country. We also request $1.5 billion for Indian education programs. With strong investments in the day-to-day operations of schools, this funding is critical as we prepare the next generation of Indigenous Americans to lead their communities. Turning to wildland fire, we continue to see the devastating impacts they are having across the country. I want to thank Congress for extending supplemental fire pay for another year. The 2025 budget invests in reforms, including $75 million to support permanent pay increases for federal and tribal wildland firefighters. Stewardship of our natural resources is a core mission for us. Interior manages about 20% of America's lands and is responsible for protection and recovery of more than 2,300 endangered and threatened species. Our request includes $2.8 billion in annual funding for conservation efforts that support key initiatives such as wildlife corridors and implementing the National Seed Strategy. I am proud of the proposal of $8 million for a mandatory funded tribal land acquisition program, a top priority of tribes, as part of our implementation of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. This proposal honors the role tribes play as stewards of the lands and will help ensure they have resources to ensure healthy lands for future generations. The 2025 budget invests $189 million to continue the progress we have made in deploying clean energy, building a resilient domestic-based supply chain, and creating thousands of good-paying jobs. The demand for renewable energy has never been greater, and Interior is leading the way to a clean energy future. Regarding infrastructure, our request includes $2.7 billion to fund operations and maintenance for our more than 130,000 buildings and structures and 65,000 miles of public roads. In addition, there is $1.6 billion in mandatory funding available in 2025 through the Great American Outdoors Legacy Restoration Fund. We are currently executing 326 GOA-funded projects with 83 additional projects requested for 2025. We cannot address our major maintenance needs through annual appropriations alone. I look forward to working with Congress to reauthorize the GOA Legacy Restoration Fund. Overall, the President's budget request for Interior invests in programs to strengthen our nation for all Americans. This great work would not be possible without the dedication of career public servants at Interior. I look forward to our continued work together on these important issues. Thank you for your partnership and support of the important work of the department and its incredible employees. I am pleased, we are all pleased. Denise, Acting Deputy Secretary Daniel Davis, and myself are pleased to answer any questions you may have. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your testimony. The chair will now recognize members for 5 minutes of questions, and I will recognize myself to begin the questionings. Madam Secretary, less than 2 weeks ago, BLM issued the final supplemental environmental impact statement for the Ambler Road Access Project, a right-of-way application to construct a 211-mile road in the Ambler Mining District of Alaska. Just 25 miles of this 211-mile road would cross the BLM land. Unfortunately, BLM took an unprecedented step in issuing the no-action alternative, effectively killing access to huge deposits of minerals. Secretary Haaland, do you know what minerals this project seeks to access?
Chairman, thank you so much for the question, and I just want to thank you. Sorry about that. I guess I'm losing my touch, Chairman. I had to remember to press talk. I want to just state in the beginning that Ambler Road is not a decision yet. And I want to say that the analysis release concerns the 210-mile road construction proposal, and no related mine proposals are pending. So if we get a related mine proposal, of course, then we will see what the proposal states and how we move forward on it.
Do you know what minerals are at that mine?
Congressman, there is no mine. There was no mine there, so there's no mine. So
it's 265.5 million tons of mineral ore that includes copper, zinc, gold, silver, cobalt, lead, and germanium, all very critical to our economy. So let's take copper for an example. According to the USGS, the U.S. is currently 46% net reliant on foreign sources of copper, and global copper demand is already starting to skyrocket. Since the Biden administration shut down the potential access to 30% of U.S. copper reserves with its land withdrawal in northern Minnesota, and now yet we're looking at more in Alaska, where does the Biden administration support new copper production, and what is in the proposed budget to make that happen?
Chairman, thank you for the question. And first, I will say that since President Biden has been in office since January 2021, we have approved 40 mining or mining modification permits since the president has been in office. That includes 5 critical mineral mines.
But these aren't new mines. And back to the original question, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? How do you build a mine without having a road to get to the mine? But these elements of copper, nickel, and cobalt are critical to the Biden administration's very own mineral-heavy renewable energy goals. Your testimony mentioned budgeting for supply chains. How are you specifically working to ensure that expedited production on federal lands is there to meet the rising demand of these minerals?
Thank you very much for the question, Chairman. And first, I will say that our interagency work group on mining reform has taken this issue very seriously. We have a mining law that's 150 years old that doesn't meet the needs of our world today in 2024. So we're proud of the report that we were able to put out, and we're moving forward.
Madam Secretary, I've got to move on. A report is not an action to make sure that we're securing these critical minerals. Moving to a different topic, since the migrant camp opened at Floyd Bennett Field last year, nearly every issue that we predicted has come to light. This includes reports of increased crime and drug use in the neighboring communities. Local residents have reported increased instances of shoplifting, panhandling, and street prostitution since the camp opened. There have been multiple arrests at the facility for assault and domestic violence, and all of this is happening while New Yorkers are having to bear the brunt of classes being canceled at school and community programs that are no longer safe for kids to attend. Do you agree that it's wrong to deny New Yorkers access to their public lands? And this is one of the only green spaces they have for these indefinite encampments for migrants.
Thank you so much for the question, Chairman. And I understand that this is a lease between the National Park Service and the City of New York. I know that
Do you agree this lease sets a new precedent?
We enter leases all the time. The National Park Service enter leases all the time
Can you
with various entities.
Can you assure the committee that no other national park sites will be used to house migrants?
It's my understanding that there are no other issues of this kind or proposed leases that are being worked on
assure
now.
the committee that no further migrants will be bused to Floyd Bennett Field?
I can't answer to how various states move migrants across the country, Chairman, but the National Park Service apparently has had the conversations necessary. And I want to assure you that we have a very robust solicitor's office who takes very seriously and advises us on these issues and overlooks our contracts. We don't do this very lightly. It's all very serious process, and we take it very seriously.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. My time has expired. I recognize Mr. Levin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Haaland, it's wonderful to see you. We miss you here on the Natural Resources Committee. Really glad you're here to discuss the department's work and the importance of providing sustained funding for you to continue your many critical initiatives that help protect our public lands, promote domestic clean energy production, and provide outdoor recreation opportunities. The department has clearly been very busy over the last few weeks, and we're grateful to hear your announcements and see final rules that are promoting renewable energy development on public lands, holding oil and gas companies accountable, and recognizing the vital role that conservation has in public lands management. I'm glad that you and the Biden administration are advancing historic action on climate change, commensurate with what this moment in history demands. I was pleased in particular to hear that we're already surpassing the goal Congress set in the Energy Act of 2020 to permit 25 gigawatts of renewable energy on public lands by 2025, with DOI already successfully permitting 29 gigawatts ahead of schedule. As you know, the Public Lands Renewable Energy Development Act, or PLREDA, which has long been bipartisan legislation I'm proud to champion, promotes the responsible development of wind, solar, and geothermal resources on federal land. It's endorsed by both industry and conservation organizations. I see this bill as working in conjunction with DOI's recently finalized renewable energy rule and the ongoing Western Solar PEIS process. The bill includes revenue sharing for states, communities, and a conservation fund, and incentivizes development in low-conflict priority areas. It will ultimately help ensure we can meet our dual climate goals of 1, enhancing renewable energy permitting and deployment, and 2, conserving our nation's treasured natural and cultural resources. So, Secretary, can you tell me more about how the administration is working to facilitate environmentally responsible renewable energy development on federal lands?
Thank you so much, Congressman, and thank you for your welcome here. It's always wonderful to be back in your company. Yes, we are. I'm very proud of the fact that we have met this goal ahead of schedule. Thank you for recognizing that. I just returned from Arizona, where we essentially cut a ribbon on the 10 West transmission line that will carry energy across state line, so into your state as well. The 500 kilovolt line, it was possible because of our early outreach and engagement. And I want to emphasize the great work of Interior staff, specifically for this project, the BLM, who knows the communities very well and engages with them early. And I think that is the key to ensuring that we can move more of these projects forward.
Can you, along those lines, compare the projects that have successfully gone through the permitting process with those that may have struggled due to community opposition? And specifically, can you speak to any correlation between how actively project sponsors engage with interested or impacted communities early on or prior to the permitting process and positive project outcomes, or how a lack of stakeholder engagement might create project delays or even cancellations?
Thank you very much, Congressman. And as I mentioned, the early outreach allows for more informed participation from tribes and stakeholders. Public buy-in also increases public confidence in these projects and reduces the risk of costly and time-consuming litigation. And I'd like to point out that for renewable energy projects, our recently finalized rule ensures there is an initial in-person meeting with the public, because we and the public have seen the improvements and outcomes from early engagement. So I really believe that is the key, and we'll follow that and move forward.
Thank you for that. Another major announcement that came out was the final oil and gas rule, which set fair royalty and bonding rates for oil and gas operators on public lands for the first time in decades, and implemented reforms Congress enacted in the Inflation Reduction Act, including some that my colleagues and I on this committee have championed. The final rule will hold oil and gas companies accountable for their impacts on public lands and provide a fair return for taxpayers. You know, we sometimes hear that the bonding reforms are unwarranted. I've heard the claim there are only 37 documented orphan wells on BLM land. Can you take a moment to tell us why this may be a misrepresentation of the issue?
Thank you, Congressman. I first want to point out that the rule reflects provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act pertaining to increased royalty rates, rentals, minimum bids, and expressions of interest. The increase in bonding helps keep taxpayers from being on the hook. I've traveled around the country and to lift up the work that we're doing on orphan gas wells and abandoned mine lands, and it's pretty clear that taxpayers foot the bill on so many of these things. We want to make sure that companies have the wherewithal to clean up after themselves. So this rule updates oil and gas bonding requirements for the first time in 60 years to ensure reclamation costs are not borne by the American public.
Thanks, Secretary. I'm out of time. Yield back.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to submit into the record a recent New York Times article showing that, contrary to Republicans' anecdote-driven claims that migrants entering the United States are causing a surge in violent crimes, according to police data, there's been no surge of violence and crime since April 2022, which is when Governor Greg Abbott started using migrants as a political tool by putting them on buses and dropping them off in cities like New York. This is New York Times, February 2024.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, time's expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming, the chair of the Subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs, Ms. Hageman. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here, but you don't need to thank me for my questions when I ask them. Secretary Haaland, as you may already know, this committee recently held a hearing during which tribal members spoke openly about their fear, as well as others, of testifying in front of Congress due to retaliation from criminal drug cartels that have been openly targeting Indian lands, such as the Sonola and Jalisco New Generation, among others. These cartels have run rampant across Indian country, particularly in the northwestern region of the United States, and are enabled by the lack of enforcement of the border laws by the Biden administration. As a member of a federally recognized tribe, I would assume that you care about ensuring that our tribal communities are safe. Yes or no, have you spoken to President Biden or Secretary Mayorkas about the damaging impacts the administration's border policy has had on tribal communities?
Congressman, or Congresswoman, I have not. However, I want you to know that I have traveled around to tribes
Okay, but you
around
haven't
the country.
spoken to either President Biden or Mayorkas about the need to close the border in order to protect our tribal communities. Is that right?
I have not.
Is that correct? All right. Yes or no, do you believe that due to the unique nature of law enforcement operating in Indian country, is it fair to say that coordination with other agencies is crucial to tackling human and drug trafficking in Indian country?
Congresswoman, the president, when he first came to office,
Have you done anything to work with other agencies to tackle the human and drug trafficking in Indian country related to the border crisis?
since the president has been in office, Congresswoman.
That is a yes or no question. Can
we
you
have-
answer? Would you please answer my question?
Mr. Chairman, can you let the Secretary answer the question?
She's not answering my question.
Congresswoman, since the president has been in office, he has restarted the White House Council on Native American Affairs. These are issues that we discuss. That we take an intergovernmental approach to all of Indian country.
What have you done specifically to work with Mayorkas to close the border in order to protect our tribal communities from the cartel criminal activity?
Congresswoman, that is not in the department's mission. We manage our public lands,
So I
and we
take it
also
that means
uphold the
you've done
trust and
nothing.
treaty obligations of our nation's Indian
You have not
tribes.
done anything to work with Mr. Mayorkas, is that correct?
No, ma'am.
Okay. During your time as secretary, what have you done specifically to work with our tribes to reduce and eliminate criminal cartels from targeting Indian country?
Congresswoman, I want you to know that tribes have been underfunded for decades and decades with respect to law enforcement and justice services, and
So
that is
have
one
you done
area where
anything
we are
specific?
working.
Have you done anything specifically to work with our tribes to address the drug trafficking and human smuggling that is going on related to the open border?
We are working very hard to make sure that Indian Affairs has several approaches to addressing recruitment and retention. We understand that they are understaffed in many of these areas, and we listen to tribes and how they would like us to move this issue
Madam
forward
Secretary,
for them.
what have you done as a cabinet-level secretary to convince Mr. Biden and Mayorkas to close the border in order to protect our tribal communities?
Congresswoman, it is my job to manage our public lands. The Department of the Interior manages our public lands and conserves our cultural heritage and natural resources for the American people, as well as upholding the trust and treaty responsibilities of our
But the Bureau of Indian
tribes.
Affairs is within the Department of Interior, correct?
Yes, ma'am, but
Okay. In 2018, under the previous administration, more than 3,200 pounds of illegal narcotics, estimated to be valued at $9.8 million, had been seized by the Office of Justice Services. How much did OJS seize in 2023?
Congresswoman, that would be up to the Department of Justice, and they can
You don't know?
probably inform you with the number of those pounds.
But you don't know?
I do not know.
Okay. Does DOI's opioid reduction task force still exist?
Congresswoman, thank you. We are working hard with tribes to ensure that that we manage their justice services the way that they want
So
to.
the question was, does the Department of Interior's opioid reduction task force still exist?
Congresswoman, I would be happy to answer that for the record.
Is the answer yes or no?
I will be happy to answer that for the record.
You don't know as you sit here today?
I want to make sure that I give you the correct answer, and I will do that when I get back to my office.
Have you heard of the Rock Springs Resource Management Plan?
No, I have not.
Thank you, I'm out of time. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Secretary Haaland. I wanted to also thank you on behalf of Native American tribes in Nevada for your leadership in designating Aviquame as the nation's latest national monument. Not only that, the Department of Interior has also been actively uplifting Nevadans in other ways since that time, including finalizing an agreement with the Department of Housing and Urban Development to make eligible public lands available for $100 an acre, far below fair market value, for the sole purpose of constructing critically needed affordable housing projects in Southern Nevada. Can you update us on Interior's efforts to support affordable housing for Nevadans, including through this agreement?
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the question and for recognizing that this is truly an issue across the country. We want to get great folks working on our public lands, and we can only do that if they have a place to live. The BLM is currently working on 2 additional conveyances for affordable housing under this MOU. One of the proposals is from Clark County, and we're working to complete that conveyance by early next year. The other proposal is from the city of Henderson, which is at an earlier stage. So we're seeing great progress and potential under this MOU, and we'll continue working with HUD and the state and local communities on this critical issue, and be happy to keep you updated on it as we move forward.
Great, thank you. Just also happy to report that facility in my district with 195 units of affordable housing specifically for seniors is on its way, so thank you for that. Also, I appreciate Interior's testimony in support of my bipartisan ACE Act, which is another tool that will give the department additional flexibility to get land deals done more quickly for housing, conservation, and other critical infrastructure. Secretary Haaland, I want to switch to staffing. The BLM administers 50 million acres of land in my state alone. Yet we know that after the Trump administration announced the plans to relocate BLM headquarters to Colorado, more than 87% of BLM's Washington-based employees left the agency. And upon her confirmation, BLM Director Tracy Stone Manning emphasized that her top priority was rebuilding the agency and fixing staff shortages. Last year in this committee, you acknowledged this issue and the impacts it has on Western communities like my own. Officials in my home of Clark County, for instance, have indicated that it can still take up to 2 years for BLM to approve some leases that would enable it to advance locally funded parks and trail projects. I just want to ask, where are we on the staff shortage? And is BLM closer to where they should be, which means is it robust enough to translate to fewer delays on the ground?
Thank you, Congresswoman, and we will take that concern back to the office with us when we depart this afternoon. I want you to know that under Tracy's leadership, the BLM has initiated a number of hiring surges and recruitment efforts to fill those vacancies. And we feel like we're continuing to make progress to build back the BLM workforce, including significant hiring increases at the headquarters and across the Bureau, because a lot of the folks don't actually work here in DC. And I will tell you that we remain committed to ensuring that we can fill these positions because we know the work is critical.
Yeah, and we'd appreciate if you let us know how Congress can best support you in that effort as well. I have a little more time. Can you tell us what it would do to BLM's ability to continue to advance smart energy development, outdoor recreation, conservation, the full spectrum of uses for BLM lands if Congress were to cut the Bureau's funding by 50%, as a jaw-dropping 144 of my Republican colleagues voted to do in fiscal year '24?
Congresswoman, of course, everything in our budget we feel is justified. As I have said many, many times, our public lands belong to all Americans. I'm proud of the work we've been able to do to lift up our public lands so that the outdoor recreation industry can grow. It can only grow if they have places to go that people want to go. So all of the work we're doing on ecosystem restoration, the Endangered Species Act, all of these things, they help preserve and conserve our public lands in a way that benefits the American people, and I believe will increase opportunities for small businesses and our economy around the country.
Thank you. I yield.
Ladies, time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Minnesota, the chair of the Subcommittee on Energy and Minerals, Mr. Stauber. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Madam Secretary, thanks for joining us today. Yesterday, the House passed the Superior National Forest Restoration Act in a bipartisan fashion. It's a victory for northern Minnesota and the people I represent, along with U.S. mineral security, in the wake of your decision to stop mining in my home state of Minnesota. Yet just a week and a half ago, you did it again. You shut down mining, this time in Alaska, when you selected the no-action alternative for Ambler Road. Earlier in the testimony, you said there is no mine. There's going to be no mine if there's no road access into it. And for the 23 miles of the BLM land of the 211-mile road, you have, in your decision, have stopped that mine once again. What economic price will the people of Alaska have to pay for this decision? And did the department analyze the economic impact of stopping Ambler Road?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And so as you know, there was no related mine proposals pending for this area.
Madam Secretary, did you analyze the economic impact to Alaska and the Native Americans?
Congressman, it's my understanding that if we had a mine proposal, then an analysis such as that would be undertaken, but there is no mine proposal, so it's difficult for us to
Madam Secretary, because time's limited, we analyze the economic impact. Stopping Ambler Road stops the 65,000 jobs the project would create. $5 billion, that's what it'd be, $5 billion in wages and $1.3 billion in local and state revenue to the great state of Alaska. Madam Secretary, expert analysis estimates that at least 384 new mines will need to be built over the next decade to meet demand for renewable energy sources. You mentioned earlier that there were 5 critical mineral mines. Were these new mines? Were these new critical mineral mines, or were they expansions or modifications of existing mines?
It's my understanding that the critical mineral mines are new permits, and we'd be happy to impart that information on your staff.
And were they Hardrock projects?
Do you know what the mines were?
You don't know, do you? Were there any coal projects? You don't know, do you? Madam Secretary.
Congressman, if you would like specifics on all of those mines, as you can imagine,
that's why I asked.
Laura Daniel Davis, our acting deputy, would
We'll
be happy
continue in
to
my
answer.
questioning, Madam Secretary. The Department of the Interior, under your leadership, has squandered every opportunity to provide these minerals domestically. The Duluth Complex in my district is the largest untapped copper nickel find in the world, and you shut it down. And as you testified before the Appropriations Committee last year, you didn't even know there were critical minerals in there. You shut it down without having any knowledge that there were critical minerals in there. During your testimony before the Appropriations Committee 2 weeks ago, you stated, quote, "This administration has made a steadfast commitment to strengthen government-to-government relations with tribal nations," end quote. 2 weeks ago, you announced a final rule for the management of the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, and last September, you canceled previous leases in the 1002 area of ANWR. Both decisions have been slammed by the Alaska delegation along with communities across Alaska, including Alaska Native communities on the North Slope, who claim you have refused to meet with them on both ANWR and NPRA. Madam Secretary, when was the last time you met with Alaska Native communities on the North Slope?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And I did my first trip to Alaska. I went all the way up to Uktiagvik. I had a roundtable with tribal leaders there. I also want to say that with respect
Madam Secretary,
to this area,
I have 47 seconds left. When was the last time that you met with the Alaska Native communities on the North Slope?
I was going to say, in addition to that, I've had many virtual meetings with Alaska Natives since I have been in office. And I also would like to say that, speaking for other tribes, because tribes are not a monolith, there are tribes that rely on a subsistence lifestyle whose lives depend on the caribou migration and other animals to help their children to live.
Is that why you put the comment period during the whaling season? That's unacceptable. Madam Secretary, just a few short months ago, there was a member of the North Slope that sat here, several members that said you have not met with them. They've requested meetings with you twice. You neglected to speak to the Native American community from the North Slope, and they said that in a hearing, and it's disappointing. In fact, they tried to set up 2 meetings with, their words, radio silence from you, and it's unacceptable, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a
Gentleman's time is-
unanimous consent request, a document that I would like to enter into the record by unanimous
I got
consent.
one too, but I'm going to let you go first.
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. Unanimous consent for 100, please, Mr. Chairman. Since it has been suggested erroneously that the Secretary failed to consult with Alaska Natives, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a document outlining DOI's extensive engagement and consultation with North Slope local governments, Alaska Native corporations, and tribal entities regarding the NPRA rule.
Without objection.
Thank you.
I also have a unanimous consent request. This is an article from the New York Post titled City Hall Vows to Probe Lawlessness Following Post Report on Spiking Crime Around Floyd Bennett Field Migrant Shelter. It says, according to NYPD data, theft, robbery, and petty larceny are all increased in the 63rd Precinct, which includes the former federal airfield between November 27th and January 7th, the first several weeks of migrants being housed at the massive tent city. Without objection, so ordered. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, for 5 minutes. You're
Thank you
recognized.
much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. New York Post and Congressional Record. Can't believe it. I want to return a little bit to one of the question lines that we saw earlier, Madam Secretary, and I want to clarify a few things. You are the Secretary of the Interior, correct? You are not the Secretary of Homeland Security, correct? The jurisdiction for border enforcement largely falls under the Secretary of Homeland's department. Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
And I think it is profoundly unfair of a line of attack to come in for explicitly targeting a secretary whose jurisdiction is legally bound for not being nominated to a different department. And I think it's profoundly important that we have clarity here on the jurisdiction of the Interior. I also find it very odd that there seems to be this push for you to be coordinating with Secretary Mayorkas, when the Republican majority has voted to impeach Secretary Mayorkas on no evidence, with no allegation of a specific crime. And yet, if their allegation is that this is a reckless individual, they also seem to be alleging here that you should somehow be responsible for working with that. So that, to me, also, I find to make no sense, and also cuts to the core of what this whole immigration thing is about here, which is unfortunately not a solution, but politics. And it's about not making sure that we solve this issue, not providing a path to citizenship, not ensuring that we are providing resources to judges to adjudicate these cases, but to continue to restrict the resources and policies necessary so that there continues to be a problem, so that it can continue to run a news cycle. We are better than this. Secretary Haaland, I'm going to say it because I think it's important too. You are the first Native cabinet secretary in the history of the United States. Is that correct?
Yes, Congresswoman.
Let alone the first Indigenous woman to ever serve as a cabinet secretary in the history of the United States from either party. Is that correct?
Yes, Congresswoman.
I find the notion or the suggestion, and it's not just because of your identity, it is because of your record, the insinuation that you do not care for, or the insinuation that you are not extraordinarily attentive to tribal issues, to be deeply offensive. It is deeply, deeply offensive. And you are not in a position to speak up for yourself because you are an eminent professional, and I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it because this woman has served on this dais too. And I had a front row seat to how she advocated for Native communities here in the United States Congress too. And the insinuation that that is somehow not central to her mission here is just completely unsubstantiated. And that's a line that we should not cross. It's just not. Tribal consultation is very important, and it is fraught. Different tribes have different standards for consultation. Is that correct, Secretary Haaland?
Yes, Congresswoman. No tribe is a monolith. Tribes are not. They're in different areas of the country. They're all going to have different experiences and advocate for different things.
And so it is extraordinarily challenging when we have such a great diversity of our tribal communities in this country to meet all these different standards of consultation. But the Department of Interior has taken historic measures to meet everyone where they are at. Is that correct? Is that a fair assessment to make?
Congresswoman, when we first got into office, I'll just point out that we had a consultation on tribal consultations. We got tribes together to ask them, what's the best way for us to meet you where you are? And so we take that information and it helps us, guide us through how we do consultations for various issues through the various bureaus and offices, but also in general for Indian country.
Thank you very much, Secretary Haaland. And, while I am sure that there are places where we always can improve, and there are places where we can always make sure that we meet people better, I want us to be very mindful about the individual that we are speaking to here, and to make sure that we're doing that with respect. And with that, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, the chair of the Subcommittee on Public Lands. Mr. Tiffany, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Secretary, having been sufficiently chastised, I'm going to start here. Roughly 40% of our southern border is federal lands. Is trash on the federal lands along the border an issue?
Congressman, I have not been to the border, so I couldn't tell you that.
How much funding in your department's budget is directed towards trash on federal lands along this southern border? Do you know offhand?
I would be happy for us to research that and get back with you on it.
Yeah, and I don't expect you to know that right offhand, but I can tell you it's zero. It's zero. The Bureau of Land Management shared with us when I was down to the southern border in February, and we looked with all the damage that's being done, fentanyl overdoses, crime that's rampant, that's happening in places around America. There's 193 tons of garbage that was picked up by the Bureau of Land Management in 1 year. You said one of the tasks that Interior, that you all take very importantly, it's one of your priorities, is conserving natural resources. Is dumping 193 tons of garbage on our federal lands conserving our natural resources?
Clearly not.
Representative Stauber, just here to my left, asked you a question in regards to consultation. Why did you not meet with the slopers? Why have you not consulted and coordinated? I understand that you met with them very early on, but since then they've had real concerns with the actions taken by the Biden administration and Interior. Why have you not met with them?
Congressman, I want to assure you that we have had very strong engagement with Alaska Native tribes and the ANCSA corporations and I can just say, starting on March 13th, 2023, the administration previewed its intent to develop this draft rule. On August 25th, in advance of the publication, the BLM mailed a formal offer of consultation to 45 tribes and 30 Alaska Native corporations.
Madam Chair, or Madam Secretary, I'm sorry, if I may interject. Do you know if the North Slope communities prefer the Obama-era integrated activity plan or the Trump-era integrated activity plan? Have they told you the one that you rescinded, the Trump-era one that was also there during the Obama era, have they told you which one they preferred?
Congressman, I do want to say that there are a lot of tribes in the area
So
that
we
you're
heard from
referring
them,
to.
Madam Secretary, we heard from them in committee here. They prefer the Trump-era plan because they went and consulted with them. Do you know, Madam Secretary, that you could be breaking the law by not following the consultation and coordination requirements that are in place?
Thank you for
Madam
the
Secretary,
information.
do you know when they came and testified before us, this, I believe they refer to themselves as the slopers, they've said since 1980, their life expectancy has went up 13 years. And it's directly a result of finding oil and natural gas up in that area that has benefited their communities. In fact, there was a gentleman that was here. His arm was all bandaged up. He took a harpoon through his hand, and if it wasn't for the clinic that was built, and we heard this directly from him, the clinic that was built as a result of oil revenue, he said he may not be here today. He may have bled to death. Did you know that their life expectancy has went up 13 years since the discovery of oil and gas?
Congressman, I appreciate that information. I want you to know that there are many tribes in Alaska, and we know that they don't all feel the same way about every single project that happens in Alaska. It's our job to hear from everyone. We did extend the public comment periods for this issue, and we understand there has been a request, and my staff is working through the request currently.
Madam Secretary, one of your employees put this quote up here. We got to rush this through. Is rushing and evading the consultation and coordination requirement? I'll close with this question. Will you commit today to delaying the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska regulation so that you can meaningfully engage with North Slope communities, Native villages, Native corporations, and federally recognized tribes? Will you make that commitment to consult with them as is required under the law?
Congressman, I can assure you that we don't generally work to rush anything through. We take everything that we do very seriously, and we follow the process to a T.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I yield to the chairman.
I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record this resolution by the voice of the Arctic Inupiat and signed by the Inupiat community of the Arctic Slope Regional Corporation, and the North Slope Borough opposing the MPRA role, citing the lack of engagement by the department. Without objection? Okay. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Napolitano. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Secretary, welcome again. And first of all, let me state that I associate my remarks with Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. I believe you're doing your best. Madam Secretary, the department is working to implement the funding we secured under the infrastructure law for large-scale water projects. But one investment is frankly not enough. It must be continuous funding to grow, construct, maintain, and operate more facilities. That is why I am proud to have introduced Large-Scale Water Recycling Reauthorization and Investment Act to reauthorize funding for water recycling and reuse projects in the West. It's imperative we work to address the climate change, not to protect our water supplies and increase the presence of regional large-scale water projects for the benefit of the future U.S. climate change. Secretary Haaland, could you speak how the department is prioritizing water recycling under fiscal 25 budget?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. And again, I want to say how happy we were to be in your district and appreciate you hosting us when we visited there. As you know, last fall we launched a new large-scale water recycling program and made initial funding from Bill available to incentivize projects at a larger scale aimed at creating new water supplies that are less vulnerable to drought and climate change. With respect to funding details, the FY 2025 budget continues to support all of the Water Smart programs, including water recycling for $4 million, and desalination for $7 million.
Thank you. I trust others are going to be seeking funding under this program. Another thing I'd like to ask is water recycling and reuse projects are a critical component in water security as we move forward, especially in the Colorado River Basin. The Bureau, basin states, tribes are engaging in ongoing communications and negotiations regarding the post-2026 operations. Until then, we're operating under the 2007 interim guides and the drought contingency plan. Do you explain to the committee how the funds for the drought contingency plan are being implemented and how the discussions have been going with tribes in and along the basin? And all tribes have been concluded and active.
So I would like to say that the Colorado River Basin, of course, we know that it's crucial to 30 tribal nations there. We're very proud of the work that the Bureau of Reclamation has done to bring people together and to make sure that tribes have a voice in how we move these issues forward. We have fostered an unprecedented level of collaboration and partnership with tribes, as well as the states and Mexico in our efforts to protect the short-term stability of the system and lead efforts to stabilize it into the future. This is the first time, Congresswoman, in history that tribes have been given a meaningful seat at the table. And I really am grateful to my team for making sure that that has happened.
Thank you for doing that. It's important to note that the large-scale water project is something new in the West. And I think many more states may be looking at it for the future protection of drought. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, the subcommittee chair of the Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries Subcommittee, Mr. Bentz. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here today. So I'd like to start with the Permitting Reform Title III, Section 321, the Builders Act. It was just passed as part of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And my question, this was drawn up a little less than a year ago, but the purpose is to kind of facilitate and make more projects happen quicker. What has your department done to implement this law? Are you writing rules now to make sure this law is applicable? And if so, where are they?
Thank you, Congressman. If it's okay, I would love to pass this question to our Acting Deputy Secretary, Laura Daniel Davis. She can answer that better than me.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you for the question, Congressman. And I think one really important matter that we've been working on across government, including with the Department of Energy, and you've probably seen really recently.
Are you writing rules?
Is the
Are you writing rules?
Can you be specific about which provisions you're referencing?
All of them. We'll just start with the first one, the Builders Act. Are you writing rules? Just say
I'm
yes
going to
or
need
no.
a little more information on the specifics. We're writing a lot of rules.
I'm sorry?
We're working on a lot of rules. So I would help specifics. We're working with the Department of Energy on transmission.
Okay, you don't have rules yet. It's been a year. You don't have rules yet to implement a law that would speed your permitting process up. Is that what I'm hearing? You don't have them yet.
Well, our
You're
permitting
working on
process, we've been working very diligently at ensuring that it is efficient, and that includes what the Secretary was discussing about early engagement with communities and tribes.
I'm not sure that a year reflects diligence, but I'm happy to hear you're doing something. Would you please give me copies of whatever it is you're doing within the next 2 weeks? Would you please do that?
Yeah, we'd be happy to respond for the record.
And
Thank you.
Thank you so much. The conservation rule, I'm unclear on the conservation rule. We had a hearing yesterday on it. Passed a bill regarding it. The conservation rule, in my opinion, is a direct attack on multiple use of federal lands by making conservation, quote, on par with other uses. Madam Secretary, tell me what on par means in your mind. And to make it more clear, my question is this conservation rule applicable to a specific space of land or across the board to every activity that's occurring under the guise of multiple use on federal land?
Thank you for the question. And you're referring to the BLM public lands rule, is that correct? Conservation, as you know, our public lands have a multi-use purpose mandate, And so we just wanted to make sure that all of the uses that our public lands are for can be worked on par with one another. No purpose is more important than the other. They're all important.
Well, that kind of goes without saying. But my question to you is, there are ambiguous, almost impossible to understand, subjective standards established for what is conservation. So my question to you is, if this is, quote, on par, does that mean that if someone wants to do something, I know a mine, does that mean then that it must comply with this new rule?
Are you referring to the restoration and mitigation leases in the rule?
Sure.
Okay, so with respect to the restoration and mitigation leases, those enable development by providing developers an opportunity to offset their impacts through investments in the health of public lands.
Right, so your answer is that when the word on par doesn't mean that it's a separate use, it means it's an across-the-board requirement of anyone who wants to engage in one of the other types of multiple use. That's what you're saying.
I want to say that with respect to this rule, we feel that it will restore balance to our public lands.
Well, that may be your thought, but what you're really saying is it's applicable across the board. It doesn't say that clearly in this rule. I wish it did, so at least people knew what's going on. On the wolf, the gray wolf, we have a bunch of them in my state, and we're going to have a hearing this week. Unfortunately, I don't think you guys are going to be there. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, wish they were, up in Minnesota. My question, I'm happy that the U.S. Fish decided that the wolf was not endangered. I'm very happy with that result. The court came out and suggested otherwise. But do you agree that the wolf is not endangered, as your U.S. Fish and Wildlife subdivision so agreed?
Of course, Congressman, as you know, we follow the science on all of these issues. So I'm not the scientist in the group, but scientists, they do study these things and let us know what the data is. So as I want to say that, yes, the science tells us that wolves are not at risk of extinction in the western U.S. now or the foreseeable future. However, you know that there's a lot of factors that we have to consider in moving forward, and one of those is climate change. To better understand the conservation needs and challenges and inform future policy, the Fish and Wildlife Service is undertaking a process to develop a first-ever nationwide gray wolf recovery plan, also creating a new effort to foster a national dialogue around how communities can live with gray wolves and include conflict prevention, long-term stability, and community security.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Yield back.
The gentleman's time's expired, and I'm going to ask unanimous consent to submit to the record this report from the Congressional Research Service entitled Federal and Indian Lands on the U.S.-Mexico Border, that states that DOI manages 607 miles out of 693 miles of federal land on the border. And that's why we held a field hearing down there, and why I would encourage everyone to visit the border that has a relation to this committee. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gallego, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Secretary Haaland. It's good to see you back in the committee room. As you mentioned in your statement, this budget includes resources to keep communities safe, protect our resources, and upholding our federal trust responsibility. One important example is the work to coordinate federal efforts to address missing murdered Indigenous people. This is something you and I have worked on together since your time in the House through legislation and hearings. It also increases resources for tribal public safety, something I've championed through my bill, the Badges Act. Second, by increasing funding to maintain and expand wildland firefighter pay, the budget prioritizes rapid response to wildfires. I met with firefighters last year to hear about the importance of this pay increase. Our workforce absolutely need and depends on it. Finally, this budget also invests in Western water solutions, especially around drought in the Colorado River system and tribal water rights in Arizona. Water shortages continue to be a top issue in Arizona, and we need investments that meet the moment and secure access to sustainable growth. To highlight these important investments, I do have a couple questions for you. In Arizona, only 14 of 22 tribes have fully resolved, adjudicated, or partially resolved water rights, with many of the tribes relying heavily on the Colorado River as their primary water supply. I know the Bureau of Reclamation has been engaging in tribal consultation regarding post-2026 Colorado River operations, but I also want to ensure that tribal water rights are protected and tribes with unsettled water rights are not left out of these important decisions that will impact their communities. Secretary Haaland, how is your department working to ensure that the ongoing negotiations over the post-2026 Colorado River operations will protect tribal water needs?
Thank you so much for the question, Congressman. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, of our request for $2.8 billion in permanent funding for the Indian Water Rights Settlement Completion Fund will enable us to make tremendous progress on completing our commitments to complete our ongoing water rights settlements.
Thank you, sir. I can't see. Thank you, Secretary Haaland. As you know, recruitment and retention of wildland firefighters has consistently been a challenge. How does the FY25 budget support recruitment and retention of wildland fire personnel?
The department's budget request includes additional funding to hire more wildland firefighters. Our funding request will also help to enhance mental health and well-being services and improve government housing. Those are all important issues. And of course, as we have in the past, we're also continuing to push for the establishment of a special base rate for wildland firefighters and permanent authorization to grant paid rest and recuperation leave. As we can imagine how difficult it must be to be out there on the front line. Our budget request also includes provisions to create a premium pay category tied to incident response and provide waiver authority for a streamlined pay cap.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And when I did meet with the wildland firefighters, it was very clear that they did need this kind of permanent pay, this transparency on where their promotions will be going, payment, as well as to retain them, because many times once they are trained, they will also be recruited by local fire departments that sometimes, many times will pay better, have way better benefits. And just kind of along that thread of line, why is permanent comprehensive pay reform for wildland firefighters a necessary reform?
Yes, of course, as you said it, the demands on wildland firefighter workforce continue to grow as our fires become year-round and not just a fire season, they're fire years. And permanent and comprehensive pay reform will help improve firefighter recruitment and retention, which is the number one thing that we need. It will also lead to stronger workforce capacity in fire operations. I've had opportunities to visit with firefighters across the country. There are heroes of this climate change era, and we feel very committed to ensuring that, that they are respected in their jobs.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, the chair of the Subcommittee on Oversight, Mr. Gosar.
Thank you, Ms. Secretary. As the first Indigenous woman to serve in your position, I know that the health and safety of young Native students is a top priority of yours, especially as it is highlighted not only in your testimony today, but also in the DOI budget. That is why I would like to take some time today to bring to light a situation that is taking place at Haskell Indian Nations University in Kansas. For those who do not know, Haskell University is a Bureau of Indian Education school, which ultimately reports to the BIA, and the secretary is their boss. That is why I was disturbed to learn about students making very serious allegations of things like harassment, bullying, theft, sexual assault, fraud, and more for years now. It is my understanding that the BIE investigated some of these claims, and then they went to great lengths to hide them, until recently when media reports made the findings public. For my first question, Secretary Haaland, yes or no, given your very strident and understandable support for the Native community, do you agree that the Bureau of Indian Education and BIA was slow to respond to the concerns of these students?
Congressman, I do want to say that I have visited Haskell Indian Nations University. We care deeply about every single student.
My question is were they slow in reporting this?
I don't have a timeline, Congressman.
Okay. Well, I got so many things to ask you, so I'm just going to leave it at that. Madam Secretary, yes or no, do you believe that the students at Haskell University deserve better than what they've been presented by the BIE? And as the ultimate administrator, you have a role in ensuring that they receive the answers they deserve.
I believe that every single Native child at any of our BIE schools deserves a quality, culturally relative education.
And you accept the role as being the ultimate person overseeing the BIA?
Tony Dearman, the BIE director, is very.
I know, but you're ultimately the boss, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I care about every single student.
I got a number of things. Will you commit to me today that you would work to make things better at this school on behalf of the students?
I work every day to make things better for everybody, Congressman, and
Gotcha.
certainly for our students.
I hear you. Now, let me ask you a question. You know, one of the things I represent is northwestern Arizona. Enrica, are you familiar with the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act?
Yes, I am.
Is there anything you could do in this administration to get that exposure that was limited to southeastern Clark County and northwestern Mojave County? They were excluded by administrative fiat. This is the Wallapai tribe. This is a whole bunch of different individuals that have been excluded for years. Is there anything you could do to help us compensate that with this administration?
Congressman, we'd be very happy to take a look at that. I know that there are a lot of communities in New Mexico as well who have been working to be acknowledged for a very long time. I appreciate knowing that, and we will take a look at it.
Yeah, this was an administrative mistake. Congress wanted to have all of Nevada and Arizona placed in there, and they did not. Somebody made an administrative mistake, okay?
I appreciate your concern for our tribal communities, Congressman.
Number two, I know that we helped settle the Bill Williams water settlement with the Wallapai, but they haven't had any adjudication along those lines. Would you be very receptive to looking at an old infrastructure aspect to form a consortium of water up in northern Arizona? Would you be interested in kind of knowing more about that so that we have a mix of the tribes with local stakeholders like cities and towns to work together to form a co-op that will benefit the whole northern part of Arizona?
We absolutely want to always work together with tribes and local communities, and we will be happy to reach out to the Wallapai on this issue.
Thank you. Now, I assume you agree that transparency in our government is better than secrecy. Would you agree to that?
Transparency?
Yeah, transparency.
Absolutely.
Okay. So is it fair to say that you would consider Citizens United to be wrongly decided?
Citizens United, the Supreme Court case?
Yes.
I don't necessarily have an opinion on that at a budget hearing here.
Okay, so would you consider that all NGOs, that if they take federal money, they should disclose all their supporters?
First of all, I want to say that if we're involved with any meetings, grant requests, anything like that, there is a process that we follow. It's closely monitored by our solicitor's department, and we follow all the rules.
But you agree that if they take federal money, they should be able to put out all their donors?
I think people should represent themselves in a correct manner. Okay. Absolutely.
I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record. I'm trying to be nice. This memo by Defend Brooks Range that says these deposits do not hold significant quantities of critical minerals. Copper is not a critical mineral. The Ambler Mining District does not contain any economically viable deposits of cobalt.
Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, Mr. Gosar, you're recognized. All right, without objection, so ordered. Anybody else want to submit something to the record?
It's Jeopardy after all. We got a ton of them.
For $200.
Exactly, no.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Sablon for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I apologize to my colleagues whose I caught into first. But Secretary Haaland, good morning and welcome. Welcome back to the House. continues to be your house also, so as a former member. I want to commend the administration's recognition of important insular area programs administered by your department under the Office of Insular Affairs and the 25 budget request. I think I have a second bite at this part of your budget because there's another one coming up next week in the subcommittee. So the budget would increase by $1 million. The TAP money that supports the Marianas, this, as you very well know, are very important to the communities and getting funding for programs normally, not in normal situations or normal programs. So thank you for that. Your budget continues investment in the Energizing Insular Communities programs, which helps the insular areas reduce their reliance on expenditures on imported fuel. I think we could work more on this, but thank you for that also. It also requests a modest increase, but an increase nonetheless for the brown tree snake program and the coral reef initiatives. The CIP money, Madam Secretary, has received an increase. It's been fixed at $27.7 million since its inception 40 years ago. Even though the infrastructure needs of the islands continue to expand, it was by law designed for the Northern Marianas exclusively, and then that changed, so it's now shared with the other territories. So I hope appropriators will agree to this. Madam Secretary, I do want to bring one thing to your attention. It was a remarkable accomplishment for us, for the United States and the freely associated states, to renew the compacts of free associations for another 20 years. The new agreements provide a meaningful funding increase, which will no doubt benefit for our national security interests as well as the future prosperity and well-being of the COFA nations and the people of the Marshall Islands, Palau, and Federated States of Micronesia. And I commend the administration. I again commend for enlisting Ambassador Joseph Yoon as special envoy to serve as the President's envoy for compact negotiations. His seasoned diplomacy and commitment to fairness and respect proved instrumental in renewing the compact. That was a really good decision. But with the increase in funding, there's the obvious need for OIA to be equipped with the resources to exercise effective oversight in the management of the fund. So are you able to assure us that that OIA will continue to do all of these tasks with the funds you request? Yes, I think yes, right? No?
Thank you so much. And thank you for recognizing the hard work of everyone who worked long hours and a very long time on the COFA package. I want to just assure you that our implementation is underway and is required by the new law. We're working to appoint DOI's representatives to the Interagency Group for Freely Associated States and require DOI members for the Compact Economic Management and Trust Fund committees. So it is all underway. We worked hard to get it done, and we'll make sure that it gets done in the right way. Thank you.
Mr. Sablon, do you have your microphone on?
Okay, so I lost 30 seconds? No, I will have another bite at OIS budget. So I have 30 seconds to Mr. Hoffman. I yield 30 seconds if he wishes.
I thank the gentleman. It's not quite enough time to ask the question that I wanted to ask the Secretary, so I will thank you and defer.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Secretary. Nice seeing you again. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Secretary. It's good to have you back. I remember when we served together on this committee, so welcome. The National Park Service is a great asset to our nation. In 2023, NPS recorded 325 million visits at more than 400 federal sites. With the fact that these parks are the jewels of America, and I've been to over 300 of them myself, I must continue to ask about the quality of guest visits. Many of our concessionaires stand ready and waiting to take up the slack. Our concessionaires are constantly judged, however, on some unknown and ambiguous criteria. And while the Commercial Visitor Services Concession Contracts Rule went into effect earlier this year, I still find some concern at the amount of transparency. Will you commit to a more transparent process for the concessionaire contracting process?
Thank you so much for the question, and of course, we always love to be more transparent. I'll take a look at this when I get back to the office and see how that is going forward. But we rely on our concessionaires.
Very good, thank you. Has NPS considered looking to the concession industry to support immediate capital investment needs?
I couldn't answer that, but I would get with Chuck Sams and find out and make sure we got back with your office.
Okay, thank you. Because I would like to explore how NPS can allow for increased capital investment from willing concession industry members under existing contracts to improve the park guest experiences. So I think with some creativity, flexibility, and willingness to work together, we could make some really good gains there.
I appreciate that.
Now, changing subjects, since the Biden administration took office, 3.5 million acres of working federal lands have been locked up through antiquities designations, resource management plans, with mineral withdrawals, etc. The most egregious land lockup is the administration's Land Conservation and Health Rule, which will allow so-called mitigation and restoration leases to lock up tens of thousands of acres per lease across the country. Now, your agency states that the authority to implement this rule comes from 43 CFR Part 2920. However, Section 2920.1 clearly states that the only authorized uses for leases under this section are for residential, agricultural, industrial, and commercial uses. There's no mention of mitigation and restoration. Do you really think that this rule will stand up to legal challenge in court?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And I do want to say that with this rule, we engaged in a robust and transparent public process. Many people had opportunities to weigh in, including our hunters, anglers, outdoor recreation enthusiasts. This rule will not inhibit any current grazing leases or anything like that. And I want you to know that everybody thought about so many of these things when they were working through the rule, and I feel confident that we have done it in the right way.
Well, it's my belief, though, that whether or not it breaks existing leases, it expands the definition of leases to unintended areas that Congress never authorized. And that's why we're doing a CRA on this issue like this week. And we're going to send it over to the Senate, and hopefully they can repeal this rule. In Colorado, and let me ask you about another subject. In the first 3 years under your control, the department has held one lease sale in Colorado, leasing a single 290-acre parcel, bringing in $1.2 million in revenue to state and federal governments. And it looks like BLM has one scheduled upcoming lease sale in Colorado for a mere 120 acres. This lease sale, along with the only other lease sale that I just mentioned, shows neglect of the western slope of Colorado. Will you commit to holding more lease sales on the western slope of Colorado this year?
Congressman, I do want to just say, because I haven't said it yet, that production on public lands is at an all-time high. And so we have been doing our jobs. Onshore, in the last 2 years, the BLM has sold the drilling rights to more than 230,000 acres onshore.
Excuse me for interrupting, what about in Colorado? There's only been one lease sale.
I beg your pardon. In Colorado, specifically, we are moving forward with what we are required to do, and I'm happy to get back with you on any specific areas in Colorado if that is what you would prefer.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Stansberry. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
All right. Well, good morning and welcome, Secretary Haaland. Always wonderful to have you back in the House, which is also your former House. And also welcome to Assistant Secretary Daniel Davis and Director Flanagan. It's wonderful to have such good friends here. I want to start today by focusing on the broad scope and historic nature of the work that the Department of Interior is doing right now under the leadership of our extraordinary Cabinet Secretary. We've already talked a little bit about this morning, but under your leadership, Madam Secretary, there's been historic leases for clean energy, protection of vast swaths of our public lands, and of course, a focus on climate resilience. And a lot of that was made possible because of this administration and our president and your commitment to climate change. And, this body just 2 summers ago passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is not only the largest investment in climate change in our nation's history, but of any nation ever in the history of this planet. And to watch the Department of the Interior implement the bill has been really extraordinary and impressive. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that the work that you all are doing to involve our tribal nations and around the Justice 40 initiative is especially important to make sure that our low-income and communities that have been historically excluded from those processes have a seat at the table. I also want to acknowledge the extraordinary work that the department has done on public lands. There's been a lot of political hype put forward today about the public lands rule, but of course, as you know, as a New Mexican, we implemented a similar rule at the state level through our awesome public lands leader, Ms. Garcia Richards, just a couple of years ago. And not only did it not lock up our public lands, we had historic revenues, and it enabled us to protect more sacred sites and conserve lands that are environmentally sensitive. So I strongly support the Department of Interior's public lands rule, and I know it'll be an important tool to put conservation and tribal sacred sites on par with the other uses that we use our lands for. I also want to personally thank you for your leadership on Chaco Canyon. Of course, our tribes and pueblos have worked for decades, well, actually over a century, to get those lands protected, and we greatly appreciate your leadership on that. And also the Buffalo Tract set-aside that just happened a couple of weeks ago. That land is, of course, important to many of our pueblos and our communities in Sandoval County as a historic and a cultural site and a wildlife corridor. I also want to commend you on your water resources work. I think you have the best water resources team probably in history, though you've had some good ones in the past. Your Colorado River work is really important for making sure that the West does not go dry. We're working on a similar bill for the Rio Grande with our colleagues in Texas and Colorado, and we strongly ask for your support on that, as well as for the Water Data Act, which is a bipartisan bill that we're trying to get across the finish line. I also want to note that you all have a water rights settlement proposal in the budget, which would enable us to fund many of our water rights settlements. And New Mexico has probably a historic number of water rights settlements in front of Congress right now. And so one of the things I would like to ask for your support and commitment today is to help us get the Rio San Jose, Rio Jemez, Navajo Gallup, Amit Taos, soon Zuni, and soon Navajo, Arizona settlement across the finish line. That's very important for us in New Mexico. May I have your commitment that you will assist us with that?
Yes, we are working every day on those settlements, and as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we want to make sure that we have funding for that particular issue.
Thank you. And I know another issue that's very important and related to that is making sure that there's sufficient funding for the Pueblo Irrigation Fund. And we want to make sure that the funding makes it into the next budget for that, as well as to make sure that we have a settlement team for the Middle Rio Grande Pueblos. So those are some of the priorities for our communities, as you know very, very well. But I want to take the rest of my time to have you talk about the work you've been doing on boarding schools and the historic work you've been doing to lift up Native voices in history and really reconfigure the department and its priorities around tribal consultation and healing.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Happy to answer that. Of course, we have our second report coming out for the boarding school initiative that should be out sometime very soon. We finished our Road to Healing. There will be an oral history project between that the Smithsonian is helping us to implement. And I think the main issue that came out of all of those meetings with tribes, all of the opportunities that survivors and descendants had to speak directly with us, is that language preservation, language revitalization. Across the board, even though things were so different from tribe to tribe, it was consistently said that their native languages had been stolen from them. So we're proud that the president and Dr. Biden are very supportive of our language revitalization efforts, and will continue to make that a priority.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I'll just finish by saying every single day we are so deeply proud to have you as our secretary and as a New Mexican and as a leader. And every single day I hear from members of our tribal communities of how grateful they are for your leadership, including yesterday when a friend and colleague of mine from Washington State, who's a tribal council member, said that you're their hero and they're so grateful that you're there serving our country. So thank you for your service.
Gentleladies, time's expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Graves, for 5 minutes.
Madam Secretary, welcome back to the committee. I appreciate you being here today. One of the biggest things that I hear last week, I had the opportunity to be home during recess week, and hearing a lot about just the unaffordability of living in America today, and specifically watching as we're seeing higher energy prices related to gasoline, related to utilities. I'm just curious, what message do you have to the American family that can't afford to make ends meet? And many of the policies that are coming out of the Department of the Interior are actually contributing to that as a result of higher gasoline and utility prices.
Thank you, Congressman. And I'll just say I missed your king cake this year, but that's all right. I had to travel all the way to your state to get one. But I will say, of course, we recognize that, and I know President Biden is working every day to lower costs for Americans. We believe that all the work we're doing on this clean energy transition will lower energy costs across the board for Americans across the country, and we feel confident about that. I know that we don't set gas prices.
Yeah, Madam Secretary, I guess just this table here really concerns me, in that you would have to go back to the Jimmy Carter administration to even find any time in our nation's modern history where you would have such few acres that are offered for energy production. And just to put things in perspective, during Jimmy Carter's administration, they leased 100 times more acres than during the Biden administration during the same period of time. So I feel like that this is a direct result of this administration's actions that are causing these higher unaffordable prices for American families.
Congressman, I do, first of all, want to say that it's undeniable that production of oil on public lands is at an all-time high. It truly is. There are also a lot of leases and
Madam
permits
Secretary,
that are laying fallow.
Very quickly, just because I don't want to mislead the public, how long does it take to go from a lease sale to production onshore, and how long does it take to go from a lease sale to production offshore?
Of course, that depends greatly on the industry.
But ballpark.
I would love to pass it to Laura.
All right, I tell you what, just so we don't delay too long, it takes on average maybe 4 to 5 years for onshore. The only lease sale you've had for onshore was in 2022, which means none of the production occurring right now has anything to do with this administration. For offshore, it's actually closer to about 10 years. Once again, none of the production today has anything to do with this administration. What you're doing is you're creating an energy crisis for the future, not just for right now as a result of future supply, but you're creating an energy crisis for the next administration and the one after as well by not producing. Now, we've had senior administration officials that have come and testified before this committee that have said when you stop producing, it doesn't prevent or it doesn't cause a reduction in demand. All it does is it causes other countries to fill the void. And so let's take a look here. This is Iranian crude, and this shows the increase in Iranian crude because, again, voids are going to be filled. Voids will be filled. And so even though sanctions and everything else, we're actually seeing their exports increase. right? And so things like the LNG pause, the LNG ban effectively, it just creates market opportunity for other countries. And so here's Iran. I'm going to guess that you don't support the Israel-Iran war that's going on right now with the terrorists and others that are occurring. And so I guess some estimates have indicated that Iran has profited to the tune of $60 to $65 billion. That money's going to Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, and American service members have been killed. Does it concern you that U.S. energy policy is funding the Iranian war? We just came in and provided $14 billion in funds to Israel. So effectively, U.S. energy policy is funding Iran. U.S. taxpayers are funding Israel's defense. Does that concern you at all? And the death of American troops associated with this? Is that concerning?
With respect to your original question on production, as I said, it's at
I'm
an
sorry,
all-time high.
I've moved on from that one, but on the Iran issue, does that concern you at all?
Congressman, I'm concerned about everything about our country. I love this country. I'm concerned.
What
about
message
everything.
would you say to the troops' families that were killed as a result of Iranian proxies funded effectively with U.S. energy policy dollars that have been killed? What would you say to them as a result?
I would like to say to you, Congressman, that there are millions of acres of leased, non-producing federal land currently in this country, and there are thousands of approved permits to drill.
And Madam Secretary, you sat before
this.
this committee and told us that there were 9,000, only to have come back and realize that the number was grossly overestimated, and also not really understanding the process, and that doesn't necessarily mean the ability to actually produce. Once again, there was just $60 billion provided in U.S. taxpayer funds to Russia. Russia is also profiting from U.S. energy policy. We're funding both sides of the war. Bad U.S. energy policy impacts American families and funds the Russians, and then American taxpayers fund the other side of the war. I'm very concerned about what's going on. I'd strongly urge you to think about the problem you're causing for the next administration and the one after. Think about the fact that this administration's energy policies are funding both sides of the wars, and American service members have died as a result.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse.
Well, I hope the chairman is as indulgent with Democratic members as he was with our colleague from Louisiana.
I think Ms. Stansbury went over about a
All right,
minute.
well, I appreciate that. I will just say this. I don't know that maybe my friend is confused about the particular witness that we're hearing from today. Ms. Haaland is not the Secretary of State. She's not the Secretary of Homeland Security. She's the Secretary of Interior. And in my view, she's doing an effective job. And I would also say, I think the questions in particular that were posed by the gentleman from Louisiana, and perhaps he didn't mean to convey them this way, but context matters. I know that the Secretary has a bone-deep commitment to the United States. Perhaps he's unaware that her father is a veteran, was a distinguished officer in the United States Marine Corps who earned a Silver Star for his service during the Vietnam War. I find it offensive.
Is the gentleman suggesting something I said was inaccurate?
Mr. Graves, it is not your time, it is my time.
I wanted to make sure I understood.
To the extent the chairman wishes to
I wanted to
intervene,
make sure I
perhaps he can,
understood.
because I haven't yielded time to anyone. I'm addressing the Secretary, and I say to you, Madam Secretary, that we are proud of your service and your family's service to our country, and grateful for the work that you were doing at the Department of Interior. Notwithstanding the histrionics from, unfortunately, some of my colleagues today, I'm surprised by it, to be candid. As you know, Madam Secretary, and it's good to see you, and welcome back to the Natural Resources Committee. I'm proud to represent the 2nd Congressional District of Colorado, which includes the headwaters of the Colorado River, and to serve as co-chair of the bipartisan Colorado River Caucus. We have been grateful for the communication and the leadership of your agency as we continue to face drought conditions throughout the Colorado River Basin. I understand, of course, that the department is currently developing post-2026 operating guidelines for the Colorado River through a multi-year and collaborative stakeholder process. I think it's important that we acknowledge the need to be proactive, in our efforts to conserve this critical resource rather than the solely reactionary and crisis-driven. To that end, I'm proud that we've introduced 2 bills, one of which has passed the Natural Resources Committee and passed the House on a bipartisan basis, the Drought Preparedness Act, which would support a critical program in your department, Madam Secretary, that the Bureau of Reclamation uses, the Drought Response Program, to provide assistance through drought contingency planning, drought resiliency projects, and emergency response actions. I'm hoping the Senate will take that bill up. As you know, your budget request includes $25 million for the Drought Response Program. I wonder if you could briefly talk about how that investment will help increase drought mitigation work in the Colorado River Basin.
Thank you very much, Congressman, and I thank you for recognizing how important the drought response programs are as part of the $66 million request for water smart programs to work cooperatively with communities to address water shortages. I will just tell you that if those authorities are not reauthorized, the drought response program, it provides assistance to water managers to build long-term resiliency to drought. As you know, people have said that it's a 1,200-year drought in the West, and you recognize that every single day, as I do, being a New Mexican. And so we feel these programs are incredibly important so we can continue to do the work and make sure that communities have the water that they need.
Well, I thank you, Madam Secretary, and I certainly hope that the Senate will heed your call and our call to pass that bipartisan bill, as well as the House with respect to the second bill in reference to the authorities that you mentioned. I just want to briefly touch on SRS, the Secure Rural Schools and the Payments in Lieu of Taxes program. Of course, understanding that NRS is primarily a Forest Service program, SRS is primarily a Forest Service program, but there is a portion operated by the Bureau of Land Management. We've introduced legislation. It's bipartisan legislation. Representative McMorris Rogers of Washington is the co-sponsor to reauthorize the SRS program for an additional 3 years. The program is critical for rural communities across the country, including communities in my district. This program has broad bipartisan support. There are 70 co-sponsors on this particular bill, and I'm certainly grateful for that. But unfortunately, I'll just say, Madam Secretary, that we've been frustrated that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have not put this bill on the floor for a vote. The authorization lapsed, as you know, back in September of 2023. There are a lot of communities and congressional districts that will be harmed if we don't get this bill done. Just to give you, by way of example, Chairman Bence's district received more than $51 million. Representative Fulcher, whom him and I have worked closely together for many years, his district received $16.6 million. I know, Representative LaMalfa, you care about this program, $11.4 million in your district. We've got to get this done. I know the department is supportive of this effort. I'm just hoping that we can implore the Speaker and perhaps, Mr. Chairman, we can enlist your support in getting this done so that all of our communities in rural America aren't harmed disproportionately. I thank the chairman for his indulgence.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for appearing with us today, Madam Secretary. Welcome back. About 8 years ago, several secretaries ago, Secretary Jewell signed an agreement to remove the 4 hydroelectric dams along the Klamath River. And now we're seeing, with the partial work of that being done, devastation to that river that you, well, I won't say can't imagine, because we could imagine that. We knew there was untold amounts of silts that had gathered behind those dams over the years. Now they've been unleashed upon the whole river system, all the way out to the mouth into the Pacific Ocean. And so I mentioned this to you when we saw each other. Have you had a chance to take a look at any of the video or photographs of that devastation, what it meant to the wildlife and water quality, et cetera, along there?
I'm sorry, Congressman, I didn't hear the exact question.
Have you had a chance to take a look at any of the photographs or videos or what have you of the devastation by the unleashing of that material into the river system all the way out to the mouth of the ocean?
I have not seen photographs, but if you...
I'm seeing what, sorry?
I have not seen any photographs, no. But I'd be happy to look at photographs.
You really should, and if you had a chance to visit in person, because what we're talking about when ostensibly this is about
salmon, and the life cycle of the salmon involved is 3 years. And there's people from the department and other entities claiming it'll be a 10 to 12-year project for the silt to actually disappear. At the same time, while they have equipment scooping silt out from the lake bottom and dumping it in the river. Now, if you were a miner, if you were anybody else, that would be probably life in prison for what they're doing there, yet somehow that is deemed to be okay. So what we're looking at is the dam removal project so far is a disaster. And at the same time, we hear a lot of talk about climate change and the type of replacing our vehicles, replacing the power generation with CO2 free, you know, right? I'm sure the department has a lot of goals on CO2, right? I mean, in general, right? Carbon dioxide, goals on reducing it? Just from the hip, ma'am. I mean, we don't have to.
Sorry.
Anyway, I'll keep moving on. Everybody has goals in the California government, the U.S. government on climate change and reducing all that. So at the same time we're talking about this, we are getting rid of the source of CO2-free electricity in dams and then dewatering other dams and making it where they're ineffective at running water through their hydro plants. We've barely kept alive the Diablo Canyon Power Plant in Central California. At the same time, we're talking about mining and the inability to extract the metals that are needed for producing the electrified vehicles and electrified everything else. So we're going in the opposite direction of both things to meet the goals that the administration and California government seems to be placing upon people to their detriment economically, jobs, et cetera. So at what point, what do you say to the public with goals like this that are wrecking the river and making it much more expensive? And let me zero in on this part. The Klamath Lake is at 90.6% capacity as of yesterday, as the lakes around California are filling up. Shasta, Oroville, Folsom's on its way up. New Malone is as high as it's been in quite a while. Yet we're seeing 40% allocation to some of the San Joaquin Valley districts. So how does your department explain that in context with people seeing skyrocketing food prices, and then we talked about hydroelectric and electricity prices? What am I supposed to say to them about the direction that this administration and your department is going?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And I know you and I have had conversations about this, and you've also essentially had an open door to the Bureau of Reclamation staff.
Thank you. Yep.
I know they're also going to be here later in the month. So I want to tell you that, yes, we understand that there was record moisture in some parts of the West. However, it's my understanding that the drought persists. And so they are working to be
even
careful with the water that we have so that people will have it into the future.
But there's not a drought. 2 years in a row, almost record snowpack. The lakes are essentially full if they're allowed to be topped off, all except for the San Luis Reservoir, which is about 25% down. So the farmers in Klamath are still, with a nearly full lake, are going to still be at maybe 2/3 of their allocation, as well as the 40%ers down south in San Joaquin. So with all that, with all this, how do you explain it to the farmers? And then let me come back to the CO2 one more time. Again, you got CO2, climate goals. What percent of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide?
I understand that you will tell me how much it.
No, I'd like to hear it from you. I'd like to hear it from you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms.
0.04%.
We've heard that before.
Once or twice. Thank you very much.
The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Hoyle. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Secretary Haaland. I just want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for your work and your availability and accessibility, specifically in talking about federal lands and timber and wildfire issues. With that, I'd like to yield the rest of my time to Mr. Huffman.
I thank the gentlelady from Oregon. Madam Secretary, it's great to see you, and I want to start by commending you for the composure and dignity you have maintained throughout some questioning that in many cases is just absurd. You have been lectured about American national security interests and apparently helping Iran and even Russia by a member of Congress who just last week voted against aid to Ukraine, handing Vladimir Putin an incredible gift, just as his incredible unfailing obeisance to the American oil and gas industry has helped over the years to essentially enrich and empower and create Vladimir Putin and his war machine. There is no amount of shame or hypocrisy that will stop some of my colleagues from rolling out the political theater and trying to score cheap points. But you've maintained your cool and professionalism. I think it speaks to who you are. It's got to be especially tough, though, to be lectured about tribal consultation from members of this body who, at best, are ambivalent about tribal rights, and their hypocrisy and spottiness on this can be seen just in the last 24 hours. And so I'm going to ask you a little bit about the gray wolf. Now, am I correct, Madam Secretary, that the gray wolf is a sacred spirit animal to most American tribes?
I believe that wolves for many tribes have a deep cultural meaning.
Yes, and in fact, in the past, when there's been legislative delisting of the gray wolf and states have proceeded to slaughter them in incredible numbers, Native American tribes have actually had to go to court and file lawsuits to protect this culturally significant and sacred part of their heritage. Am I correct about that?
I believe you are, Congressman, and I just want to say that all life is essentially sacred to Native Americans, and I know that they care deeply about every animal that has a right to be on our landscape.
And should Native American tribes have a voice? Should they be consulted in wildlife management decisions affecting the gray wolf?
Well, across the board, I appreciate you raising that because we have entered into 200 co-stewardship agreements with tribes across the country, not just for animals, but for landscape health as well. And we feel that their indigenous knowledge has a lot to offer us. Indigenous knowledge is science, and we can rely on that as a tool that we use to protect our lands for future generations.
And that, I would say, is as it should be. But just yesterday, to a person, every Republican member of this Natural Resources Committee on the floor voted to reinstate a Trump rule that did not involve any tribal consultation for the gray wolf. And then they went a step further and prohibited any judicial review, which kind of gives up the game. It would certainly suggest that they don't care very much about tribal consultation when it comes to the gray wolf. But more broadly, it has been suggested that because you don't agree with the Native American voices that want to do oil and gas drilling in some places, and you have listened to other indigenous voices that may oppose oil and gas drilling or may support land conservation, that somehow you're insensitive to tribal consultation. I find that offensive. It's got to be hard to listen to while keeping you cool, but you have done it. Let me just give you the remaining time that I have to speak to just what a serious value this is and priority this is to consult and lift up Native voices.
Thank you, Congressman. And of course, since President Biden has been in office, tribal consultation has been a top priority of his. As I mentioned earlier, he restarted the White House Council on Native American Affairs. Many of us have secretaries' tribal advisory committees. We want to make sure that tribes have a seat at the table. At one point, it seemed like we were doing so many consultations that the tribes were just asking us to slow down a little bit. I know that their voices are incredibly important. And there were decades and decades where tribes never were asked to have a seat at the table, where they never had opportunities to tell the federal government what their policies were doing to them and their communities. That's one of the reasons why our federal boarding school initiative has been so important to tribes across the country. I appreciate I appreciate you being with me when we went to visit with the tribes in your district. That was incredibly important, and I know it means a lot to them for you to listen.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Yield back.
Gentlemen, as time's expired, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Fulcher, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Madam Secretary, thanks for coming and for being back here. It's good to see you. I have had a chance to look at some of your written testimony and also heard some of your verbal testimony as well. But I haven't picked up, at least clearly, the answer to the following. And it has to do with the number of renewable energy projects that the department has approved in this administration. Do you happen to know how many of those approximately renewable energy projects that have been approved?
I feel like I know that number, but I would love for Laura to answer that question because I don't want to get it wrong, if that's okay with you.
Please.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Congressman, I can tell you the megawatts approved, and it's somewhere exceeding 7,000 megawatts. We would have to get back to you on the specifics of the numbers.
Okay, so let me do a follow-up question then. How many mining projects have been approved in the approximate same window of time?
Since the president has been in office, we have we've approved 40 mining or mining modification permits, as well as 5 critical mineral mines.
So there appears, at least from my vantage point, that there's a disparity where there's a focus much more in favor of renewable energy projects and over the mines at a time where we have so many needs for critical minerals. Mr. Chairman, with that, I would like to yield some time to Mr. Stauber.
Thank you very much, Representative Fulcher. Secretary Haaland, the chair, Resselman, put into the record the Voice of the Arctic Inupiat resolution, number 2024-1, meaning their first resolution of this year. And I want to say that they're called the Voice. The Voice membership is comprised of local governments, tribal service providers, and Alaska Native corporations across the North Slope of Alaska. In this resolution, it says, whereas prior to the convention, that's the Alaska Federation of Native American Convention, held October 13, 2023, the North Slope Trilateral Regional Leadership wrote Secretary Haaland a letter asking for a meeting regarding both the ANWR and NPRA announcements and lack of meaningful engagement with the region's leadership. AFN convention came and went without a response granting or denying the meeting request, and to date, no response has been received. Do you dispute that?
I do.
So are you telling us today that you specifically met with the Voice of the Inupiat on ANWR and NPRA Alaska?
I am saying that we have not ignored any voices in Alaska.
Madam Secretary, this is a yes or no question. I'm asking you specifically. Did you meet with the North Slope Alaska Natives, the Voice of the Inupiat, those groups on the North Slope? Did you specifically meet with them? That's a yes or no question.
I know. I feel like I need to explain further on how this whole issue was dealt with, because we gave opportunities for the tribes in Alaska as well as the corporations to respond to tribal consultation requests.
Madam Secretary,
it was not
with my minute and a half left, this is just a simple question. Did you specifically and individually meet with the Alaska Natives on the North Slope?
Congressman, if you would like a detailed list of everyone that we have met with, we are more than happy to get with you or your staff after this meeting. I want to say,
I don't need you to get. I don't need you to get with me. I need you to get with the Alaska Natives on the North Slope.
I understand.
I've asked you Madam Secretary, I've asked you 3 times. It's a simple yes or no. Did you specifically meet with the Alaska Natives on the North Slope before you put this rule forward? That's a yes or a no.
My first trip to Alaska, I went up to Uktiagvik. I had a tribal meeting, with a tribal roundtable with tribes all over the district, as well as a
Again,
state legislator
Madam Secretary,
from the
this will be the
area.
fourth time I ask you specifically, did you meet with the Alaska Natives on the North Slope?
Are you, do you,
Specifically for your ANWR rule and NPRA Alaska, did you meet with them?
I can say that the BLM held 3 in-person meetings on the
Mr. Chair,
proposed rule.
with that, I find it difficult that the NPRA's 23 million acres is entirely located within the boundaries of the North Slope region of Alaska, and she can't answer the question whether she met with them or not, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, for the record, wanted to respond to the Secretary that my understanding is there's only been 5 mines that have been approved since in this administration. The others were related to some sort of expansion. So with that, yield back.
Does the gentleman yield?
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Mullen, for 5 minutes. Gentleman recognizes the gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Case, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Secretary, aloha. It's good to see you. I want to commend you and recognize you and your department on a number of items that I think are relevant to the hearing. First of all, I detect in the questions from the other side some fundamental misunderstandings about what tribal consultation actually consists of. Essentially government-to-government interaction with the indigenous peoples of our country that occurs on many levels, but is fundamentally an interaction and a sign of respect and inclusion of the indigenous peoples. And I know this for a fact because you have been exemplary in terms of your understanding of the Native Hawaiians, the indigenous peoples of our country whose native lands are in Hawaii, and the consultation level in the Department of the Interior over your administration has been superior, and so obviously indicates, from my perspective, a complete understanding of what consultation actually means. So that's number one. Number two, certainly, I believe that you have been exemplary in terms of your understanding of the critical threats presented to many species across our country. So in your administration of our endangered species laws, half of the endangered species in our country are in Hawaii. Clearly, you have focused to there. Mr. Sablan has already talked about the compacts of free association, which were critical agreements for our country on a number of levels. The Department of the Interior was central to getting the COFA over the finish line. I just met with the leaders of those countries, and they are still talking about the fact that it was a critical set of understandings and agreements. Number four, you understood and your department understood the significant and severe tragedy of the Maui wildfires and was part of a government-wide response in Lahaina and Maui overall. You took a personal interest in that. I deeply appreciate that. Number five, I believe that your management of our national parks, our treasures, as was already said, has been exemplary. And your administration of the Great America Outdoors Act, which you championed as a member of Congress, where you are now administering some $500 million a year to address our national parks, has been a very significant contribution. Number six, we are in the middle of implementing generational reinvestments in our infrastructure through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, trillions of dollars. And the Department of the Interior is personally responsible for getting out of the door and into communities tens of billions of dollars under those infrastructure laws to critical areas that I think we could all agree are essential from the perspective of our broader interests. These fall in the areas of climate resiliency, including wildfire resiliency, tribal electrification, which I think we believe is critical importance, and then legacy pollution projects where we simply have to clean up. The infrastructure dollars have been going out of your department for that. And then finally, I would note your responsibility for the territories of our country, who often feel that they're not fully included, and you have embraced them, both as a department and personally. These are critical parts of our country. And so those are just 7 of the areas where I believe that the department's contributions and your contributions personally have been noted, both for our country as well as for my Hawaii. And I thank you for all of that. What I'd like to do is give you a little bit of time to comment on one area that comes out of the Maui experience, and that is wildland fire management, which is an area that you are responsible for. Could you just give us a little bit of amplification of how the budget addresses wildfire prevention, which is impacting so much of our country?
Thank you so much, Congressman. And I just want you to know that one of our staff is still detailed to Maui, working with FEMA to make sure that things are right for the Native Hawaiian communities there. Of the 7.1 million, about 3.4 million is for NAGPRA grants. Let's see, this funding will support the Native Hawaiian community by providing grants to Native Hawaiian organizations as well as to museums. The remaining 3.7 million in funding will be used to assist interiors, bureaus, and offices with prioritizing and expediting repatriations. That is not what you asked me. I apologize, Congressman. The bill funding in 2023, DOI completed more than 2.5 million acres of priority wildfire risk reduction using annual appropriations and bill funding. With the bill funding, 71% of the acres interior treated were in the wildland urban interface, protecting places where people live on or adjacent to federal lands. And I think that is some of the areas that you spoke about.
Thank you very much. And I also thank you on NAGPRA. That's really critical as well.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this legal analysis from the University of Colorado Law School and the University of Utah College of Law that details the statutory authority of BLM to update their multiple use mandate to incorporate conservation as a use on par with other traditional uses. The analysis states that based on the plain language of the Federal Lands Policy Management Act, the public lands rule represents a sound interpretation of the mandates provided to Congress by BLM.
Unanimous consent's been granted.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Radewagen for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Westerman and Ranking Member Grijalva for holding this hearing. And thank you, Secretary Haaland, for your testimony. It's always good to see you, as always. I want to thank the Office of Insular Interior for the work they do on behalf of the territories. I appreciate the support and testimony Assistant Secretary Cantor and Deputy Assistant Secretary Nakoa gave on behalf of my bill, H.R. 6062, and our efforts towards self-determination and self-governance. I also appreciate that the FY25 budget proposal includes level funding for the American Samoa Operations Account. The stated goal of OIA's assistance to the territories is to offset the difficulties caused by our geographic and economic isolation and encourage our island's eventual self-sufficiency. On a related note, in an often overlooked bit of history, American Samoa's first cannery many decades ago was built with support from a DOI initiative to kickstart our economy. Now, Starkist is second only to the local government as an employer. Unfortunately, our fishing industry and our self-sufficiency is now under existential pressure from overzealous and short-sighted green politics. As part of President Biden's 30 by 30 initiative, the administration has a pending marine sanctuary proposal covering the area around the Pacific Remote Marine Island Monument. The monument was already doubled in size by the Obama administration And with this expansion, 777,000 square miles of tuna fishing grounds, which supply our cannery, will be subject to multiple layers of environmental oversight. To put that in perspective, that is over 4 times the size of California. Our natural resources are already protected under the Magnuson-Stevenson Act, and adding another layer of bureaucracy adds no further protection. Expanding the monuments without allowing for commercial fishing will devastate American Samoa's economy. I'll be requesting report language directing no less than $3 million from the operations account be allocated to the American Samoa Community College. The territories do not want to be a charity case, and we will invest in education, and our island's future leaders and business owners will work to make every dollar count, and we need Interior to ensure the money is going to go where it needs to go. However, I assure you that if the fishing industry fails in American Samoa, the long-term cost to the federal government will increase exponentially. Instead of our little $28 million buffer account, the territory will instead require hundreds of millions in federal assistance as our island drops below even further the poverty line. So, Secretary Haaland, would you be able to get us an update on the status of the Marine Sanctuary proposal? Since NOAA has sponsored a workshop, they did it last September, we've not heard anything.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the question. And I unfortunately, I can't give you a specific update now, but we would be more than happy to ensure that we reach out to your staff soon after this. And certainly if there's anyone in NOAA that you need to be in touch with, we'll try to make sure that you are in touch with them. But you're absolutely right. Indigenous voices are incredibly important here, and I appreciate you saying that, and we abide by that.
Considering DOI's obligations to the territories and the fact that nearly 80% of American Samoa's exports and port traffic revolve around the cannery, what is your contingency plan to cover the potential GDP loss if the cannery closes?
Again, I apologize. I can't answer that specifically, but absolutely, we will take that back and make sure that we get you detailed information on that question.
So, Secretary Haaland, can I have your commitment to DOI and OIA's oversight authority of the territory? Will you ensure that federal funding going to the territories is being used for intended social programs and that territorial governments get the technical assistance they need to implement those programs and avoid waste?
We absolutely will follow the law, and we appreciate all of your support on the work that we did on the COFA.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I also have some questions for the record regarding the Marine Monument and its impact on the territories that I'm hoping you'll be able to bring back for an administration response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time, which is none.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Dingle, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get to my remarks, and it's great to see the Secretary here, I'd like to ask for a unanimous consent request to enter into the record a report from the nonpartisan Cato Institute. There have been many people making arguments this morning that illegal immigrants are smuggling drugs across the border and contributing to the fentanyl crisis, wreaking havoc across the country. This report debunks some of the rhetoric and distortions we've heard this morning about fentanyl. To quote the report, here are the facts. In 2021, U.S. citizens were 86.3% of convicted fentanyl drug traffickers, 10 times greater than convictions of illegal immigrants for the same offense. Over 90% of fentanyl seizures occur at legal crossing points or interior vehicle checkpoints, not on illegal migration routes. So U.S. citizens who are subject to less scrutiny when crossing legally are who are more often the smugglers. Just 0.02% of the people arrested by Border Patrol for crossing illegally possessed any fentanyl whatsoever. Annual deaths from fentanyl nearly doubled from 219 to 221. I had a family member myself who I lost. After the previous administration banned most travel and asylum And the fact that so many Americans are dying from fentanyl is a tragedy. We all need to care about it. But let's not scapegoat asylum seekers or shift blame on where some of the problem is. And I'd like to insert this.
Without
for the
objection,
record.
so
Thank
ordered.
you. Madam Secretary, it's great to see you. I'm going to now, because I did that, have a shorter period of time. One of the priorities that, and you're doing a great job today. I'm sure you would rather be at the dentist office having some really awful work. But one priority we share are our wildlife refuges, which are an integral part of conservation programs in the United States. Our refuges conserve 850 million acres of federal lands and waters that help manage, conserve, and restore fish, wildlife, and their habits. You know, you visited it, my district's home to America's only international wildlife refuge. The Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge has islands, wetlands, marshes, shoals, and waterfront lands along the Detroit River. It's the last undeveloped mile along the river. It supports over 300 species of birds. Unfortunately, refuge managers have been juggling many responsibilities with small budgets for too long. The refuge system's budget has seen nearly no change since 2010. When accounting for inflation, it has less funding capacity now than it did 15 years ago. And despite a 36% increase in visitors since 2010, full-time refuge employees have decreased by 16%. Only half of the 500 refuge field stations are staffed, so we're only able to monitor less than a third of the over 1,300 threatened and endangered species found in the refuges. Madam Secretary, I have a few questions. About how many visitors come to the refuges every year?
It's upwards of 68 million visitors.
And how has the budget shortfall impacted how the refuges can be used and enjoyed by Americans?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for this line of questioning. Our over 500 wildlife refuges, as you know, play an important role in conservation. The refuge system delivers recreational, ecological, economic benefits to local communities of all sizes. Recreational visits to the refuge system also generate over $3 billion for local communities, local economies, and over 41,000 jobs across our nation. Those are all important byproducts of a healthy refuge system. And of course, we recognize that we make the most out of limited staffing, funding, and other resources. We do the best we can, but it is valuable. Our wildlife refuges are valuable gems in our national culture.
So our colleagues across the aisle often complain that the Endangered Species Act isn't recovering species as quickly as they would like. But national wildlife refuges are an integral part of the recovery plans, and they're severely underfunded. How does a lack of ESA recovery funding plus a lack of refuge funding hinder species recovery? Can you provide an example?
Thank you so much for that question as well. And I mean, I'm thinking right now as you're talking about a wildlife refuge I visited in Wyoming. There's a toad there that almost went extinct. And were it not for the Fish and Wildlife Service and the dedicated staff ensuring that what little resources they had went to this project, we would add another species to the list of species that went extinct. So when extinction means forever, they say that all the time. We just finished our 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act, and I am proud of the dedicated staff every day who recognize the value that these species bring to our world.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'm out of time and yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ladies, time's expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Curtis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Secretary. I can't help but be here with you and think about, with fond memories, serving together with you here in Congress. Thank you for your work and thank you for being here. Now, that said, you know that I'm going to bring up a sore subject in Utah. It's the BLM landscape and conservation rule has once again irritated the wound that makes Utahns feel like they're neglected and that people here in Washington have it out for them, adding further divide to something that's already divided. And let me be clear, I believe Utah's farmers and ranchers have cared for this land for generations and generations. They want to leave it better than they found it and have done a fantastic job at that. Yet this takes just another poke at them. And these are the people who are most impacted by your rule. I know there have been some comments today about the impressive groups of letters that have flooded the messages that they want to support this. And I feel like it's a little bit like bragging about the Valentine's cards you got when you asked people to send them to you. More importantly, 1 million artificial messages aren't worth one comment from somebody who actually lives on this land. And to that point, I wrote you a letter last year asking you to have a listening session in Utah before this rule was implemented. Let me remind everybody, I know I say this a lot, I just don't think it sinks in. Utah is 66% owned by the federal government. The rural parts of my district are over 90% federally owned. I think everybody needs to think about what it would be like to run a community when 90% of the property is managed by somebody 2,000 miles away. You didn't respond to this request. We got no listening sessions in Utah. Can you tell me why you weren't willing to do that?
Congressman, I will say with respect to the public lands rule that it was a very transparent process where whoever wanted to comment publicly was able to do so. And I feel very confident that the staff that we have in Utah is very close with the local community there. We saw that when I visited your state on several occasions. And I feel confident that those local communities have complete access to the BLM staff.
Let me agree with you. We do love your BLM staff on the ground. They're good people. They integrate into the community, and so they understand the community needs. And that is the problem with people from Washington who don't understand those community needs, and that's where the pushback comes from. Let me go to a term in the rule that says sustainable recreation. The agency uses the term sustainable recreation multiple times, but never defines it. Can you define what is sustainable recreation?
It's my understanding, and please don't quote me on this, even though I'm on the record. Sustainable recreation to me says that we want these outdoor recreation industry to continue to be able to use these areas for recreation.
But that implies there's a non-sustainable recreation. Can you tell me the difference between sustainable and non-sustainable recreation?
I can't at the moment, but I'd be happy to answer that for the record.
Yeah, we would love to know that. I mean, people on the ground are wondering, what does sustainable recreation mean? Let me also then go to the rule is not intended to prevent or decrease recreation, and that word intend is very bothersome to me. How do we know how to get that gets interpreted? And then let me just a little bit more. One paragraph lower, you say the BLM clarified mitigation language that would allow for renewable energy and development or other kinds of projects, even when that development produces unavoidable impacts. That isn't multiple use. That sounds like a hierarchy to me. The rule literally says renewable supersedes conservation as a use, and conservation can supersede recreation. Help me understand that language.
Congressman, with your permission, I would like to pass to Acting Deputy Secretary Daniel Davis to answer that question.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Congressman, thank you for the question. And I think I would not agree with your characterization or reading, and I'm not saying you have it wrong. I'm saying that the intent is not to suggest that. I think the BLM in that instance was trying to provide examples to be more clear that the public lands rule and what is set forth provides a process to assure balance.
We're going to run out of time, but let me read this again. Renewable energy development or other kinds of projects, even when that development produces unavoidable impacts. Why does it say renewable and nothing else?
I think they were seeking to provide an example, and it's not meant to suggest that other multiple uses are not situated in the same manner.
So what is the purpose of the rule if the projects supersede conservation?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question.
I guess we're out of time, but I just want to make the point, there is no purpose for the rule if projects that want to be done supersede the rule, which is how I'm reading this language.
I'm sorry, I really don't understand the question. I do want to reaffirm that the rule is meant to assure that multiple use in practice can continue through the decades and through generations.
I am out of time. I'll yield. I'll just simply say it says renewable energy will supersede. So that's not clear to me.
Gentlemen's time's expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Mullen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Haaland, I first want to thank you for your recent visit to my district and for touring the Don Edwards San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge with me. We are very fortunate to have this land set aside both as a critical habitat for migratory birds and also as a space for our community to enjoy nature. During your visit, I learned about ecosystem restoration at the refuge, and my first question to you, Secretary, is about Interior's approach on these issues. So the question is, how is Interior working to restore ecosystems on federal lands, and how do these efforts ensure benefits for both conservation and recreation?
Thank you so much. And thank you for hosting us at that beautiful refuge. It was just amazing. The Don Edwards, we continued to have conversations even after we left you, and it was really wonderful. I'm immediately thinking about our Keystone initiatives. We have areas, it's like across the country, we have certain areas where we are working to restore landscapes in various areas that are Keystone initiatives. For example, the bison on our grasslands. I apologize. I am so cold right now that it's hard for me to concentrate on anything else. Forest birds in Hawaii, salt marshes on the East Coast. These are all ways that we are working to make sure that our ecosystems are restored. And that means that connecting these places around the country means that we all can work together and make sure that these landscapes last into the future for future generations.
And as you saw, my district, we're surrounded by the San Francisco Bay on one side, Pacific Ocean on the other side. So our communities are very aware of the dangers posed by sea level rise due to climate change. California has already experienced roughly 8 inches of sea level rise over the past century, and current projections predict an additional 10 to 12 inches over the next 30 years. So I want to thank you for Interior's $2 million in funding for climate resilience projects, specifically at that refuge. So, Secretary, could you share with us some of the recent impacts of sea level rise on Interior lands and assets, and what are some approaches Interior plans to use to mitigate flooding on public lands?
Thank you so much. I want to say yes on Interior lands, but also on tribal lands as well. Sea level rise, nobody can escape that. And the Quinault Nation in Washington State, for example, is working to move their entire traditional village inland about 4 miles because of this issue. So we're supporting tribes when they have to move in this way, and we are working to do whatever we can. There are a number of sites around the country that are currently being impacted by that sea level rise and storm surge, as you mentioned. The building over the USS Arizona at the Pearl Harbor National Memorial is experiencing greater strain due to rising sea levels. Here in D.C., the work to rehab the seawalls at the tidal basin, I think the cherry trees that need to be pulled out got the most new media around the country, but we need to make sure that we're paying attention to that. In Florida, the National Key Deer Wildlife Refuge is sinking due to sea level rise. In South Carolina, the Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge. All of these areas, we have to pay attention. There are a lot of birds that nest on land. In these areas, if it's flooded, we don't have the next generation of seabirds. So there's a lot at stake with this issue, and that's why everything we're doing, from renewable energy to landscape restoration to the work in these areas, it helps immensely.
Thank you for your leadership on all of those fronts, Madam Secretary. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Madam Secretary, I'll say that a lot of things change over time, but the temperature in this room is not one of those things. It's consistently cold in here.
Mr. Chair, may I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record emails from the Voice, the regional tribe of the Arctic, by Doreen Levitt. She's the Director of Natural Resources. It was dated October 13th of 7:02 p.m., requesting a meeting with the Secretary, and a response 3 days later. Unfortunately, Secretary Haaland is unable to join the meeting. I'd like to enter that into the record, please.
Without objection. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Duarte, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to yield back to the chair for a short time.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Secretary, you mentioned earlier that you have not been to the border, and I've been to the border many times, and the fact that 35% of the border is federal lands, I think, is a good reason for us to go, and it's a reason why we held a field hearing in Arizona along the southern border. And my question to you is, do you have plans to go to the border, or will you commit to go to the border just to see and understand what's down there? Because it's shocking to me every time I go.
Congressman, thank you for that question. I do want to tell you, and we recognize in fact, I think in this committee, we had a hearing about our national parks and refuges that are on the border. So yes, there are a lot of important wildlife and landscapes in that area. I want you to know that the DOI has a strong working relationship with other federal agencies in the southwest border area.
But my question, and I need to yield back to Mr. Duarte, will you go to the border?
Congressman, I can't answer that at the moment, but I'm happy to take that request back to my scheduling staff, and we will be happy to let you know.
I hope you will make that a top priority. And I'd also like to point out that CBP's fentanyl seizures have increased more than 800% since fiscal year 2019. And our fiscal year 2023 seizures of fentanyl, as reported by CBP, have already surpassed the fiscal year 2022 seizure. So it's a massive problem, and everybody knows the fentanyl is coming across the southern border. I yield back to Mr. Duarte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here with us today. I'm a freshman. I'm from California Farming District. I do a lot of resource work. We rely on a lot of natural resources. As Secretary of Interior, do you recognize your important role in rural community development? Do you realize that resource utilization, whether it be fisheries, forestry, water on the farms, drilling American oil, providing American energy, is really the backbone of economics for rural America and keeping the American dream alive with affordability and opportunity?
Yes, rural communities are incredibly important, and in fact, I represented rural communities when I was in this committee.
Well, I've got a few specific questions because I'm highly confused. I think what we see in America today is what I would call resource abandonment, complete abandonment of our natural resources at many different turns that are really hammering the American dream for many people in my district and many families throughout America, whether they be lobstermen in Maine or farmers in the Valley. Let's use the Valley for an example. Our reservoirs, after 2 robust years of rain, very, very heavy rainfall and snowpack years, the reservoirs are over 90% full, most of them 95+% full, just keeping a little bit of flood space and managing their levels. But downstream, we see water allocations from the Bureau of Reclamation under your charge at 35%. We see downstream, offstream storage at San Luis Reservoir at with 500,000 acre feet left to fill it as we get towards the end of our runoff season. What are you doing here? Why are we not getting this water on the farms? Why are we not getting it for municipal and industrial use? Why are we letting these critical natural resource go to waste?
Thank you so much for the question, Congressman. And I look forward to you having the opportunity to speak with Camille Tootin, who will be in front of this committee sometime this month, I believe. She is the expert on the water in California. I recognize that, yes, there were several good years, lots of two great winners. However, my understanding is that we have to plan for the future. And I know that that Reclamation is working to maximize storage and groundwater recharge in these areas. We're incorporating the best science into the operations.
Yeah, excuse me,
and
I'm
investing
sorry.
in water
I'm sorry. I see that you're reading something that you're handed there. That's great. You're not planning for the future. These dams are 92% full. We've got farms that need this water to produce crops this year. At the end of the season, come summer, we'll be dumping a very large amount of this water into the rivers to create flood control space in these same Bureau of Reclamation, Army Corps of Engineering dams. And this water will be wasted after the farmers have already made their crop plans and missed their opportunity to prosper from it. So I don't know how you're planning for any other than a dystopian future, quite honestly.
Gentlemen, time has expired. The chair
Yield back. Thank
recognizes
you.
the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Madam Secretary, for being here and laying out all the great work that the Department of Interior has been doing. I'd like to recognize also that in the 117th Congress, when Democrats were in control, President Biden signed into law magnificent bills that have led to the largest investment in rural America basically since the New Deal and electrification. And a lot of those amazing investments in rural America, which are making the difference so that we can have kind of work in rural America that ranges from recreation, which often occurs on lands that you oversee, to renewable energy, to your new rule, which is going to be a benefit to ranchers, right? That there are many ways in which we can have economic development in rural America and on lands that the public owns and that belong to the public. So I really want to thank the fact that your agency has been implementing those laws with great effect. I also want to recognize that in this hearing room, we've had some of your assistant secretaries come and talk about the great work they're doing with more 638 contracts, right, that are being processed, but really no more staff. Like you have the same amount of staff doing a lot more work. And you were kind of understaffed and overworked, and we appreciate how you were rising to that occasion. So thank you for doing that. I want to talk a little bit about something that we dealt with on the floor regarding the 1872 Hardrock mining law. The date tells you everything, 1872. It is old. It needs updating. Unfortunately, the updates that have come out of this committee would make it easier for mining corporations, foreign mining corporations, China, for example, to actually mine our resources. And we have seen the effect of that in New Mexico. You've seen, as you've driven home, as I've driven home, the piles, the tailings, and the effects. I hiked to the Pecos watershed where we had such a abandoned mine and where we are looking at the possibility of withdrawal. The Forest Service is reviewing that. And we want to make sure that if the Forest Service sends you that information, that in fact the Department of Interior will work quickly to analyze it to make a determination. Because you know that river flows not just from New Mexico, but it flows down through New Mexico into Texas, and those waters are important for agriculture, as was just pointed out. These waters are essential for our rural economies and keeping them clean. So with regards to reviewing if there is a request for a mineral withdrawal, whether you'll be able to act swiftly upon that.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. And of course, we take our obligations to manage the public lands and waters on behalf of all Americans very seriously and recognize that some lands warrant special protection. I'm happy to know that you go there personally and enjoy those lands. Withdrawals often build upon decades of efforts by local stakeholders, local communities, people just like you who like to be on those lands. And so I would like to say that the principles of President Biden's America the Beautiful initiatives to support this locally led and voluntary conservation and restoration efforts we pay attention to those immensely. And I understand that the Pecos watershed is a special place, and if requested by the Forest Service, we'll work diligently to consider the request.
Thank you. I want to sort of, while we're on water, I want to talk about an issue that I think affects many of us in this committee on both sides of the aisle, of the need to get to Indian water rights settlements. As we know, those water rights settlements come out of decades, sometimes half a century of negotiations or litigation, and we're moving away from litigation to try to get to settlements. And we know that they're very difficult because water is life, agua es vida. They mean everybody, right? Whatever state you're in, but especially in the Midwest, has to make compromises. The department included a proposal for $2.5 billion in mandatory water funding for Indian water rights settlement. We have very little time, but can you speak to why this is important to have that much money in there?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Reliable water is crucial to tribal communities, and this permanent funding for settlements will help us work with tribes and Congress to meet our trust responsibilities to ensure that tribal communities receive the water resources they have long been promised.
Well, thank you, and I have run out of time. Thank you for such a quick answer, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the hearing.
And ladies, time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Haaland, it's good to see you here today. Your written testimony highlights the facts that the department is the steward of 20% of America's land, and in that capacity serves critical roles for the nation, including generating jobs, supporting local economic growth, and managing important national and cultural resources. Now, as a business owner myself, I like to think of your budget kind of like as a Bible. I think it speaks volumes about your values, you know, the good, the bad, and even the ugly. And while it may not always be pretty to look at how we prioritize our spending, I do think it says a lot about who we are. And in any budget, just like in any business, there will be things that we agree on and things that we don't. And that's okay. But frankly, as part of my job here, both in traveling across my district and across this country, as part of this committee, I get the privilege, much like you, of listening to people and hearing what is working, what they like, and a lot more times what they don't like. So in your budget, I'm also seeing some things that are concerning. Your written testimony also devotes a significant amount of space to promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this is both for underserved communities and employees at the department as part of its ongoing equity action plan. The department's budget calls for a number of program budget increases among various bureaus to achieve its goal related to the equity action plan, which is, my understanding, just was recently updated. To start, Madam Secretary, I would like to clarify, just a simple yes or no will be good. The department does require its employees to abide by all federal laws regarding equal employment, civil rights, and anti-discrimination practices, correct?
Yes, we follow all the laws, Congressman.
Okay, good. We got that straight. So the mission of the department is to protect and manage the nation's natural resources and cultural heritage, provides scientific and other information about these resources, and honors its trust, responsibilities, or special commitments to American Indians, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, and affiliated island communities. Now, I don't see anything in the mission statement about DEI or even environmental justice, which I know you're going to tell me is a direct order from President Biden because of his executive order. But let's get back to the budget, because to me, that's where the rubber meets the road. We need to be talking about priorities here. At the same time, you're endorsing a budget that asks for millions of dollars to require staff to do more DEI training. You'll also sign off on a blanket lease to house migrants on parkland in New York City and not worry about the impact that could have on the park employees there. Am I correct with that?
Congressman, you are correct that there is a contract
Thank you.
between...
And just for the record, The community surrounding the Floyd benefit field area using CEQ's own screening tool has a number of both environmental and social justice issues, none of which seemed to be a concern for the department in practice when it came to waiving environmental standards and signing a lease. You know, instead of increasing programming for DEI classes for staff, while at the same time complaining that you need more money to hire staff, there are times in life when we need to figure out how to prioritize. And Madam Secretary, I say that because of this. We're in high inflation right now. As a matter of fact, we're going to stagflation. And your department is directly responsible for not issuing leases for offshore drilling right now. And that can provide 15% of the oil that's needed. You're also dragging your feet on LNG permits to the point where the DOE had to pause LNG. So you're not only harming Americans, you're harming our allies. And you're also emboldening Russia, who is our enemy, who is going to be selling that LNG to Europe. And you're also emboldening Iran, which was held to 400,000 barrels a day, and now they're producing over 3 million barrels a day to sell it, where we should be doing that and have our own energy independent. With that, I don't think I have time to yield to you, Mr. I'll yield 30 seconds.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, what percentage of the Biden administration's policies are responsible for the record gas and oil development that you mentioned earlier?
I'm not sure I understand the exact question.
How many oil and gas leases will be held in the Gulf of Mexico fiscal year 24-25?
There will be 3.
3. Do you think that's adequate?
Congressman, we're following the law, and I will just say we're following the law, and we're having 3.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yield.
You didn't issue any. You're not planning on issuing any this year.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. There's no time to yield. Who are we yielding? What's going on here?
I've been gracious with people's time. I'll keep that in mind when you go, Mr. Huffman.
I counted the 56 extra seconds.
You're being sued because you didn't issue leases now. And we had a hearing here earlier to where somebody representing you said that they weren't going to reissue any leases this year, and probably not next year as well.
The gentleman's time has expired.
With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
That question can hopefully be answered for the record. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Porter, for 5 minutes.
Secretary Haaland, my colleagues across the aisle have leveled some strong accusations against the Department of Interior today. I am an avid national park visitor. I have been to, I think, 33 and counting, including about 12 since I've served on this committee. These accusations against the National Park Service and your management of it are really concerning. I can't in good conscience drive my minivan with its oversight license plate onto these national parks unless we dissect these allegations. First, Republicans on this committee have accused the National Park Service of providing inaccurate and unreliable backlog figures when accounting for deferred maintenance. They have cited mismanagement, waste, and fraud. What methodology are you using to determine cost estimates for the national parks maintenance backlog, and is it in line with standards used across the government?
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the question. In fiscal year 21, the department transitioned away from estimating deferred maintenance cost estimates based on work orders. We revised our methodology and are now consistently estimating deferred maintenance across the bureaus. We're using accepted industry standard approaches to generate our current estimates.
So, are there any uncontrollable factors that the department accounts for when determining the remaining costs of deferred maintenance?
As you noted, we have national parks all over the country. Many of those are old. They have historical buildings and historical inventories on those. Sometimes, yes, it takes a lot more of work to find the carpenters and workers that can work on these historical inventories, such as the ones that we have across the country.
And of course, many of these deferred maintenance projects are also in remote locations. The maintenance work requires things that have been impacted by supply chain problems. Extreme weather like a fire or a flood, I know, can not only create new maintenance issues, it could also halt the plan for planned maintenance. So it seems to me like you're using accurate, consistent calculations that are widely accepted across the government. So I want to go to the second claim that I heard my colleagues make. They said that the Department of Interior lacks strategic planning and coordination. And they have cited in the past a September 2023 Office of Inspector General report that did identify numerous weaknesses in the National Park Service deferred maintenance process going back as far as 1999. So these were pretty long-term problems. Secretary Haaland, that report, that September 2023 Inspector General report included several recommendations for the National Park Service to address and improve its deferred maintenance process. Has the National Park Service addressed or begun to address those recommendations?
Yes, of course. And I want to assure you, Congresswoman, that the NPS maintenance program is very strong. We had a very complex portfolio of 75,000 assets, from Yosemite's Ahwahnee Hotel to Mount Rushmore to the Washington Monument. There is never a one-size-fits-all for any of these, as I mentioned earlier. And estimates now comply with DOI policy and require less time for field staff to develop. So we're working on all of those issues to make sure that we can do it in
And in
the right
fact,
way.
in January 2024, the GAO also released a report, a new report, on the department's deferred maintenance backlog. What did that report find?
The GAO found that the department was managing the deferred maintenance backlog and selecting projects for LRF funding appropriately.
So we've seen huge improvement. There was a problem, the Department of Interior addressed it, and they addressed it promptly. We see a lot of recommendations that go unaddressed for years. In this case, the agency acted quickly, and the GAO has already told us that there is progress being made. I want to move to the final claim, which is that the department, and this is so ironic as you've been sitting here for hours with your very competent staff, that the department is somehow not engaging with Congress for us to conduct oversight of this deferred maintenance. What do you say to that allegation?
I want to say that our door is open, and in fact, if any member of Congress requests a phone call from any one of us, we work hard to meet that request in a timely manner.
So I think your department's also held some staff briefings. I mean, it seems to me that the Republicans are focused on the wrong problems. Secretary Haaland, I just want to close by asking, did Congress increase or cut the National Park Service's budget in 2024?
Congress cut the National Park Service's budget in fiscal year 24.
And did that help the National Park Service deal with its deferred maintenance backlog?
Budget cuts never help us.
So the real problem here is budget cuts. The department has the right system, they have the right accounting, but they can't do those projects if they don't have the resources. Thank you, I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Boebert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Haaland, is it the department's practice to use, my time is still here.
Gentlelady, suspend.
We're going to reset the clock.
And please reset the clock.
We'll have fun later, Jared. Secretary Haaland, is it the department's practice to use the best available science in rulemaking? Science, data, facts?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Yes, we always work to use
Will you commit
the
to
best
using the best available science, meaning the 2016 USGS study, when finalizing the Colorado River Field Office and Grand Junction Field Office RMP?
We will, we always work to use the best science available, Congresswoman.
I would disagree, but last summer, the department issued a draft resource management plan to lock up 1.6 million acres from responsible oil and gas production in Colorado and in my district. Unfortunately, the analysis in the draft RMP relies on an outdated USGS study from 2002 instead of a more up-to-date analysis conducted in 2016. So, Secretary Haaland, how is locking up 1.6 million acres out of 1.9 million acres from oil and gas production, how is this going to ensure lands are managed for multiple use and sustained yield?
Congresswoman, I'm not quite sure specifically which acres you're referring to.
1.6 million acres in western Colorado. And it sounds like this is just another strategy the department is employing to lock up more lands across the West and undermine American energy dominance. Now, are you not familiar with the monument designation that's being proposed?
Are you talking of
I'm talking about 1.6 million acres, and it's kind of...
Are you speaking of the Thompson Divide area?
I am not. So Secretary Haaland, I strongly oppose this misguided effort by extremists to designate this national monument in the Dolores River corridor and its surrounding areas in southwest Colorado. And it's very concerning that you're not familiar with what's going on. The senators have had press conferences there. There's been public comment. I have constituents like Sean Pond who are talking about this each and every day and reaching out to your offices without a response, trying to protect these lands for multiple use. And they're being absolutely ignored on this. And, well, I have a letter here for you. And typically when I do send letters, I get some sort of half response from staff. And so I would like to hand this to you directly today.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you, Secretary Haaland. And with this letter, there's more information about this monument. And I want to just iterate here that Senator Bennett and I, we have a bipartisan community-led bill to protect the Dolores River corridor without a national monument designation. And I need you to commit to Coloradans to working with us on this particular bill and oppose this unilateral land grab that will cause harm to the people who live there. And I just want to say, disregarding the agreements that have been achieved on a bipartisan basis and the much time that has been invested in this Dolores NCA, this would be a complete insult to Southwest Colorado, and it would contradict the DOI's direct description of the Antiquities Act, which I have quoted there in my letter. And so, Secretary Haaland, the department is asking for an additional $2.8 million. You know what? I'm not even going to go into this right now. I mean, this is just more DOI and civil rights issues, but I really want to stay focused on the land here. But I need to know that you are looking into this issue, are familiar with the 1.6 million acre land grab that is being proposed, and will have conversations and responses to actually working on this bipartisan Dolores NCA that the senators of Colorado and I have been diligently working on with stakeholders who are local and familiar with this area to prevent this national monument land grab, this designation.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the letter. I will read it when I get back to my office. I also am happy to know that you're working with your senators. As you know, I've been to Colorado many, many times. We care about your state, and I appreciate your hard work.
We care about our state, and we care about the multiple uses that take place on our public lands. This is the people's land, and at every turn, the federal government is trying to lock up more and prevent this multiple use, prevent the mineral resources from being produced, prevent recreation, and this designation is going to further harm Western Colorado. And just while I have you in my last few seconds, you've made multiple references to the 30 by 30 land and water grab in your testimony. How much taxpayer money does your department plan to spend or waste this fiscal year in pandering to the enviros in this pursuit of this radical initiative?
Thank you, Congresswoman. The America the Beautiful initiative is just that. It's an initiative. It's not a line item in our budget whatsoever, but we feel that the work that we're doing essentially moves the initiative forward.
I do
Ladies, time has expired.
America the Beautiful, locking up land and water from sea to shining sea.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Kamlager-Dove, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary. I just have to commend you on your grace and your temperament. I am sure that your ancestors are proud. They're probably meditating hoping that you get out of here soon. So I have some clarifying questions for you. So 90% of fentanyl is coming through ports of entry. Does the Department of the Interior have jurisdiction over ports of entry?
No, Congresswoman. No, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Yes, I didn't think so. Okay, so tell me this. Does DOI have jurisdiction over the containment and or the enforcement of controlled substances?
No, we do not.
Okay, I didn't think so. Is your department also responsible for busing in and transporting these migrants into New York and all over the country?
No, that is not under our mission.
Okay, I didn't think so. Is DOI responsible for sending troops overseas? There had been some articulation earlier in this committee that somehow you are responsible for sending troops to Iran.
No.
Okay, so I didn't think so. My colleagues have also been adamant about you taking over Mayorkas's job. I know that women often do so much more than men, that is true, but I don't think you want that job. Can you remind us, for the record, the mission of your department, and can you also share with us where you have traveled across this country?
Thank you very much, Vice Chairwoman. And yes, the mission of the department is to manage our public lands, to protect our cultural resources and cultural heritage for every American, also to uphold the trust and treaty obligations of our nation's 574 federally recognized tribes.
Thank you. Are you also actively preventing recreation from happening across this great country?
Not at all. And in fact, I feel confident that our outdoor recreation industry has grown since President Biden has been in office.
Amen. Amen. Okay, so my Republican colleagues have continuously been complaining about the dwindling oil production that is happening on public lands in this country. Is there legitimacy to these complaints?
Vice Chairwoman, it's undeniable that U.S. oil production on public lands and waters is at an all-time high, and that is verifiable information on a website.
I love facts. I do love science and data. Thankfully, so do you. Madam Secretary, a lot has been said about your leasing policies. So can you confirm the amount of leased acres and permits that have been approved but are not being used?
Thank you very much for the question. I will say that there are millions of acres of leased non-producing federal lands, and there are thousands of approved permits to drill that the industry is letting sit unused. We'd be happy to work out a specific number for you if you would like that.
Thank you, because I don't want you saying anything from the hip. Is it true that the Department of the Interior has recently finalized a number of important rules that will both promote clean energy and also ensure stronger protections for our public lands and waters while holding fossil fuel industry accountable?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. And in my last remaining moments, I have to say I've been getting Killers of the Flower Moon vibes up here in this committee today when it comes to some of the tribal interrogatory questions that have been asked of you. Incredibly offensive, foul. You did say, I'd like you to reiterate, that you have been hearing from tribal communities and that they are not a monolithic group. Is this true?
Yes.
And can you just share why is the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative so important to the tribal community?
Well, first of all, I believe very strongly that it helps tribes to heal. This was a horrific era of our country's history. It's a history that every single American shares and that every single American should know about. On our road to healing, we were able to essentially find out the priorities of tribes and how they want to move forward with this issue. And as I mentioned earlier, native language revitalization is one of those areas, and we're very proud to support that in tribes in the way they want to move their native language revitalization forward.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Ladies, time's expired. The chair
Mr.
recognizes the
Chairman,
gentleman.
I'd like to ask for unanimous consent.
Um,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article that is titled Tribes Worry About Police Staffing, Not Cartels. It's from Indian Country Today, and it's an appropriate item to introduce after the Vice Chair's questions, because it's really about the hearing that we had a few weeks ago in which tribal leaders talked to us about their public safety concerns, not border issues. The other thing I want to just note is that the Department of the Interior has had unprecedented consultation with tribes during this administration and consults with tribes daily on every possible issue you can imagine. So the accusations that we've heard today are just absolutely false.
Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado.
I ask unanimous consent to submit the letter that was handed to Secretary Deb Haaland into the record, and I won't go through and make a speech with my request.
Without objection, so ordered. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. Secretary Haaland, can you tell me who owns our lands under the jurisdiction of the Department of Interior?
The American people.
Thank you. Can you tell me the mission of the Department of Interior as it relates to these natural resources and to the scientific information that you put out?
Yes, it's to manage those public lands and essentially make sure that the cultural heritage and all of that is there for the American people.
Oh, specifically, the mission says to conserve and manage the nation's natural resources and cultural heritage for the benefit and enjoyment of the American people. It doesn't say for some, it says for the American people, to provide scientific and other information about natural resources and natural hazards to address societal changes and create opportunities for the American people. It doesn't say for some. Let me ask you, when you look at how you regulate, is it in the interest of all American people, or is it in interest groups that happen to be louder than other aspects? And do the policies that specifically limit access to the owners of these lands that you manage and that in your mission statements say for the American people, not some, when you limit access there, does that take into account all the American people?
Congressman, I wake up every single day, as does my really amazing team and staff of nearly 70,000 career staff. They wake up every day to do their jobs for all Americans.
Okay. So when you make these decisions, your mission says you're about getting science and other information out, but also, I'm assuming, using that in your decisions. Can you tell me when you make a decision to ban lead in ammunition and in fishing sinkers on a large number of refuges, can you cite the science that you use for how there's specific impacts on these properties and the resources on those properties? Because there's nothing that I've seen that's been published or anything out there that has been part of that decision-making.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And the best available science shows that lead ammunition and tackle have negative impacts on wildlife and human health, notably for species
what specific
like eagles.
studies? Yeah, that's a generic answer, Madam Secretary. What specific studies? Can you name the studies and the authors of the studies, the journals that they're published in, to show the risk that's shown scientifically?
I would be more than happy to answer that for the record, Congressman, to make sure that you have those
you're not, but
studies
you're not aware of the studies, but you'll put those together
Well,
after the fact.
I can't cite them at the moment, but we'd be happy to give you the scientific approach to all of this if you would like.
Are there other criteria that you use in making decisions about management of Department of Interior properties?
We talk to a lot of people, We make sure that local communities and people that use the land, hunters, anglers, fishers, people who use those lands have opportunities to speak with us, and we actually do hold a lot of roundtable discussions with people around the country.
So if a group comes to you and says, Madam Secretary, we just don't want these people to use the land. We don't like hunters or fishermen. We're anti-hunting or anti-fishing. Do you take their ideas into account in how you develop a management strategy?
I can't say that I know of anyone in this country who would say they don't like hunters or fishers, but...
Madam Secretary, I will give you a whole list of people that do not like hunters and fishermen.
Well, hunters, anglers, outdoor recreation folks, really, we want them to be happy on our public lands, and we take their conversations very seriously, and quite frankly, you know that the Fish and Wildlife Service, that's really their job, is to make sure that we have those resources on our public lands.
So if one of these groups that just says, hey, listen, Madam Secretary, we just don't like these anglers and hunters, we don't want them on the lands, you're saying that none of that goes into any of the decision-making, that you look at how these lands are supposed to be managed for the folks that go there to enjoy them, and the folks that said, we don't want those people there, you're saying that those either don't get considered or they do get considered?
On the contrary, we're working to make sure that everybody has access to our public lands. Every single American should and must have access to our public lands. That goes for accessibility issues all over our public lands. And the Fish and Wildlife Service is actually expanding hunting and fishing on various refuges. We'd be happy to make sure that you have a status update on that as well.
But when you ban particular types of uses, when you say you can't use lead for hunting and fishing, and all of a sudden you make it unattainable for many people that are on limited incomes, have to deal with high gas prices today and the failure of Bidenomics, the failure there of grocery prices, you're saying it's not a problem to get them to suffer a little bit more and make sure there's additional costs for them to access the lands that they own. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Gentlemen's time's expired.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Kamlager-Dove, you're recognized.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record Appendix B from the Congressional Research Services Report, National Monuments and the Antiquities Act, which shows the historical use of the Monument Authority. Since 1906, all but 3 presidents have used this act to declare at least one monument. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Without objection, so ordered. While we're asking unanimous consent, I would like to remind the Secretary that the Department owes this committee responses to over 20 letter requests, and I'm asking unanimous consent to submit each of these outstanding requests for the record, and I would also ask the Secretary to commit to responding to the outstanding document request. Without objection, Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks again, Madam Secretary. I think we're almost done here. We have just a little bit of cleanup that I would like to do on this issue of tribal consultation. So you were asked a couple times about a group, Voice of the Inupiat, and whether there was consultation with this particular group. Let me just clarify a few things with you, if I could. That particular group is a nonprofit advocacy group, not a tribal government, correct?
That is my understanding, Congressman.
Yeah. And does the legal requirement to engage in tribal consultation extend to every advocacy group, or is it for tribal government-to-government consultation?
They are government-to-government tribal consultation, and we do send out letters to the actual tribe, and they respond if they're interested in consulting with us.
Right. You know, you've said, and others have said, that tribes are not a monolith, which is certainly true, but it seems like across the aisle, they are a monolith because the only tribal voices they talk to are the ones that want to develop oil and gas or want to support a mining project. But when they are simply part of an advocacy group or maybe some individual member of a tribe, do you personally have an obligation to meet with them and call that tribal consultation? Or is there some confusion, perhaps, about what tribal consultation even is?
Tribal consultation is government to government consultation with federally recognized tribes.
And you've been criticized for not personally meeting with this particular advocacy group as well. When the Department of Interior does tribal consultation, are you personally involved in every one of those meetings, or do you sometimes involve other leaders within the department? For example, if BLM is engaged in a rulemaking, would you personally take all the tribal meetings, or is it expected that maybe someone from BLM would take care of that?
Yes, that's correct. Generally, depending upon the issue that is being consulted about, the Assistant Secretary or Bureau leader will meet with the respective tribe and make sure that they are consulting with them on that basis.
All right, thank you. And since my colleagues across the aisle apparently have some short-term memory problems, they have suggested that tribes actually were better consulted under the Trump administration. I do have a unanimous consent request, Mr. Chairman. It is to enter into the record an article from Native News Online entitled "Trump's Tribal Record, the Destructive Era." And it explains that during the Trump administration, tribal leaders saw, and I quote, "how fast the doors of access were closed to tribes," end quote. The failure to reconvene the White House Tribal Nations Summit was pointed out in this article, and the fact that meaningful tribal consultation was, quote, "nearly non-existent," end quote, during the Trump administration. So I would ask that we enter that into the record. And then lastly, because I find it frankly just remarkable that my colleagues across the aisle would even deign to ask you any questions about tribal consultation or tribal sovereignty or tribal rights in any regard. I've been in Congress for 12 years, and I have not seen a single time when tribal interests conflicted with an oil and gas development, a pipeline, a mining project, a dam, anything else, where my Republican colleagues did not summarily throw tribes under the bus in favor of those industrial interests. And I want to challenge my colleagues, if they can find a single case where I'm wrong about that, I want to know. I want to know a single time that any of them have ever voted against the interests of a dam or an oil and gas development or a pipeline or a mine or anything else where tribes were opposed to it, because my experience is they threw the tribes under the bus every single time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hunt, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Secretary Haaland, thank you so much for being here, and I would like to thank you and your team for your support of my bill last week, H.R. 7377, the Royalty Resiliency Act. Thank you so much for helping us with that. Thank you so much for supporting us in that. I know we don't get to talk about very much bipartisan stuff these days, but again, greatly appreciate it. This legislation will provide a common sense solution to implementing communitization agreements and how royalties are paid to the Office of Natural Resources Revenue. So again, greatly appreciated your support for that. While I do support this issue, I do have some concerns that I would like to address today. I said it before, and I will say it again. American offshore oil and gas operations produce the world's cleanest barrel of oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico in the entire world. We do it safer and better than anywhere else. But since day one, this administration, and during your tenure, ma'am, have had obstacles placed in the way of American excellence, in my opinion. The American people have repeatedly seen this administration cave to extreme environmental activists. And this administration has placed federal government's thumb on the scale against American oil and gas. And again, we as a country must unleash American energy, not just for us, but for the entire world. I do not want to empower Iran. I do not want to empower Venezuela. I do not want to empower rogue nations. I'm a combat veteran that fought against these extreme and these rogue nations, and I want to make sure that the world is powered by our clean, abundant resources that we have sitting right here in this country in our grasp. And that's kind of what I want to fight for every single day. My first question for you, ma'am, is why has this administration included only 3 offshore oil and gas lease sales in the past 5 years in the past 5-year plan, if you don't mind answering that one?
Thank you so much, Congressman, for the question. BOEM held 11 lease sales under the 2017 to 2022 National OCS leasing program. We had 2 lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico last year, which generated nearly $623 million. And in those sales, we leased approximately 3.3 million acres.
Okay. My next question is, are you familiar with the Copperhead to Loving Pipeline project with BLM?
Are you familiar with it? No. I
No.
apologize. We'll find out about it, and we'll be happy to contact you after the...
I would really appreciate that. If you don't mind taking a look at that and in good faith, getting back to us, we'd greatly appreciate that. This has been sitting at BLM for almost a year. It's an essential project for this country's domestic supply of oil and gas. If you don't mind, I would really appreciate if you got back to me on that.
We'll be in touch with your staff soon.
Thank you. And then lastly, provisions to the IIJA granted DOI the ability to pursue CCUS in the Gulf of Mexico. It has been 3 years, and the DOI still has not provided guidance. Could you please explain why there has been such a delay in issuing this guidance?
I apologize for that as well. If we could answer that for the record, Congressman, we'd be more than happy to.
That I greatly
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
We'll have somebody reach out to your staff, and we'll have a conversation about it.
Yes, of course, ma'am. And I want to thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your help on my bill.
Yes.
And again, I really want to make sure that we don't regulate this industry to oblivion. So whatever we could do to get projects moved forward and get them going, we greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Congressman. And as I have said several times during this hearing, production is at an all-time high. And our career staff, they're working on the leases, they're working on the permits. This is an ongoing thing since the president has been in office.
And all-time high is great, but again, it needs to be higher. We are not trying to compare ourselves to where we were in the past. I want to absolutely have the maximum amount of energy produced in this country to fuel the world for American excellence. Not comparing ourselves to the past, but comparing ourselves to what our capacity can be. Thank you so much for being here. I yield back the rest of my time.
Gentleman yields back.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a memo from the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs entitled Fact-Checking the Trump Administration's Attempt to Rewrite its Native American Record, False Promises to Tribes. Thank you.
Without objection. Madam Secretary, I want to thank you for your valuable testimony and to the members for their questions today. The members of this committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses or for you, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. on Monday, May 6th. The hearing record will be open for business 10 days for these responses. If there's no further business, without objection,